There is a kind of pain in this world that does not bleed, does not bruise, does not leave any mark on the skin, and yet it can keep you awake for months, for years, for what feels like an entire lifetime. It is the pain of holding on to someone who is no longer there, or who is there but no longer yours, or who was never really yours to begin with. And if you are listening to this right now, if something in these words feels familiar, if your chest tightens just a little at the thought of a name, a face, a voice you once loved, then you already know exactly what this pain feels like. You do not need anyone to explain it to you. You have lived it. You are perhaps still living it. And that is perfectly okay. You are not broken for feeling this way. You are not weak. You are not foolish. You are simply human, and to love deeply, to care profoundly, to attach yourself to another soul with everything you have, that is one of the most natural, most beautiful, most terrifying things a human heart can do. The Buddha himself, before he became the awakened one, before he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and touched the earth and shattered the chains of suffering, he too knew what it meant to love. He had a wife, Yasodhara, whose beauty was said to rival the moon. He had a newborn son, Rahula, whose tiny fingers once wrapped around his own. He had a father, King Suddhodana, who loved him so fiercely that he built 3 palaces just to keep him from ever seeing the sorrows of the world. The Buddha did not become enlightened by never loving. He became enlightened by understanding the true nature of love, the true nature of attachment, and the difference between the two. So let us talk about that, you and me, quietly, honestly, without pretending that letting go is easy, because it is not. Anyone who tells you that letting go is simple has probably never truly held on. And anyone who tells you to just move on, as if the heart has a switch you can flip, has probably never felt that deep, aching pull that comes when you try to release someone who once felt like home. There is a passage in the Udana, one of the lesser-known collections in the Pali Canon, where the Buddha speaks to a group of monks about a man who was drowning in a river. The man was clinging to a log, and the log was keeping him afloat, and he was grateful for it. But then the current carried him to the shore, and he reached dry land, and still he would not let go of the log. He picked it up, placed it on his head, and carried it with him wherever he went, through the village, through the marketplace, up the hills, into his home. The monks laughed at the absurdity of it, and the Buddha smiled and said, "So too, monks, is the nature of clinging. What once saved you can become the very thing that burdens you, if you do not know when to set it down." Now, think about that for a moment. The log was not bad. The log was not the enemy. The log served a beautiful, necessary purpose. It kept the man alive when he needed it most. But there came a point, a quiet, unmarked moment, when the log was no longer saving him. It was weighing him down. And the tragedy was not that he had held on. The tragedy was that he could not see when holding on had stopped being survival and started being suffering. That is what happens with people sometimes, is it not? Someone comes into your life and they are your log in the river. They keep you afloat. They give you something to hold on to when the current is wild and you cannot feel the ground beneath your feet. And you love them for it, and rightly so. But then the season changes, the water calms, you find your footing on solid earth, and yet your arms are still wrapped around them, not because you need to be saved, but because you are afraid of what it would feel like to stand on your own. Or perhaps it is the other way around. Perhaps they were the one who let go first, and you are left standing on the shore, arms empty, wondering why the weight of nothing feels heavier than the weight of everything you once carried together. The Buddha taught about this with extraordinary gentleness. He did not say, "Stop loving." He never said that. In all the thousands of suttas, in all the vast ocean of his teachings, he never once condemned love itself. What he pointed to, again and again, with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world, was the nature of attachment, which is a very different thing from love. Love, in its purest form, is like sunlight. It falls on everything equally. It does not demand. It does not grasp. It does not say, "You must stay, or I will suffer." Attachment, on the other hand, is like a hand that closes around a butterfly. The tighter you squeeze, the more you crush the very thing you are trying to keep. In the Samyutta Nikaya, there is a teaching where the Buddha explains the arising of suffering through a chain of dependent conditions. He traces it all the way back, link by link, and at one critical point in that chain, he arrives at upadana, which is clinging. Clinging to sensory pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rituals, clinging to the idea of a permanent self. And within that clinging to sensory pleasures, there lives the clinging to people, to the warmth of their presence, to the sound of their voice calling your name, to the particular way they laugh or the way their hand fits inside yours. The Buddha saw this not with judgment but with the compassion of a physician who understands exactly where the pain originates. You see, the problem was never that you loved someone. The problem, if we can even call it a problem, is that somewhere along the way, you began to believe that your happiness depended on them. You began to build your world around their presence, brick by brick, until they became the walls, the roof, the foundation of your inner home. And when they left, or when the relationship changed, or when they simply became a different person than the one you fell in love with, the whole structure trembled. And you were left standing in the rubble, not knowing how to rebuild, because you had forgotten that you existed before them. You had forgotten that you were whole before they arrived. There is an old story, not the commonly told ones, but one found in the commentaries of the Dhammapada, about a woman named Patakara. Now, Patakara's story is one of the most devastating in all of Buddhist literature, and it is also one of the most redemptive. She was a young woman from a wealthy family in Savatthi, and she fell in love with one of her family's servants. Her parents, of course, disapproved, so she ran away with him, and they lived together in a small village on the outskirts of the city. They were happy, in the way that young love is happy, fiercely and without caution. She had 2 children with him, and then one day, when she was traveling to her parents' home to give birth to her second child, a terrible storm struck. Her husband went to clear a path and was bitten by a snake and died. Her newborn baby, whom she had delivered alone in the rain, was carried away by a hawk. Her older child was swept away by a flooding river. And when she finally reached Savatthi, she learned that her parents and her brother had all perished when their house collapsed in the same storm. Everything she had loved, everything she had held, everything she had built her world around, was gone in a single night. Patakara lost her mind with grief. She wandered the streets of Savatthi, her clothes torn, her hair wild, her eyes empty, and the people of the city called her the mad woman and threw things at her to drive her away. And it was in that state, stripped of everything, hollowed out by loss, that she stumbled into the Jetavana, the monastery where the Buddha was teaching. The monks tried to shoo her away, but the Buddha raised his hand and said, "Let her come." He looked at her, this shattered woman, and he did not preach to her. He did not give her a philosophical lecture on impermanence. He simply said, with a voice that was steady and warm, "Sister, recover your mindfulness." That was all. Just those words. And something in his voice, something in the quiet authority of his compassion, reached through the fog of her madness and touched her. She stopped. She looked at him. And she began to weep, not the wild, uncontrolled weeping of insanity, but the deep, grounding weeping of someone who is finally allowing themselves to feel what they feel. The Buddha then spoke to her about the nature of existence, about how there is no one, in all the rounds of rebirth, who has not at some point lost a child, a parent, a lover, a friend. He said, "The tears you have shed over the course of this long journey through samsara are greater than the water in the 4 great oceans." And Patakara, hearing this, felt something shift inside her. Not a sudden erasure of pain, but a widening, a sense that her grief, as vast as it felt, was held within something even vaster, the shared sorrow of all beings who have ever loved and lost. She did not stop grieving in that moment. The Buddha did not expect her to. But she began to see her grief differently. She began to understand that her suffering was not a punishment, not a failure, not a sign that she had loved wrongly. It was simply the natural consequence of impermanence meeting attachment. And that understanding, gentle and slow as the dawn, was the beginning of her liberation. Patakara eventually became one of the foremost nuns in the Buddha's community, renowned for her deep realization and her compassion toward other women who had experienced loss. She became a teacher, not despite her grief, but because of it. Her broken heart became the very ground from which wisdom grew. Now, you might be thinking, that is a beautiful story, but my situation is different. Nobody died. The person I am trying to let go of is still alive, still walking around in the world, still posting on social media, still breathing the same air as me, and somehow that makes it harder. And you know what, you are absolutely right. In some ways, it is harder to let go of someone who is still present, still reachable, still theoretically possible to hold. Because as long as they exist within your orbit, there is that whisper, that seductive little voice in the back of your mind that says, maybe. Maybe they will come back. Maybe things will change. Maybe if I just wait long enough, love hard enough, hope fiercely enough, the story will rewrite itself. That whisper is not evil. It is not something to be ashamed of. It is the voice of tanha, of craving, and the Buddha understood it with perfect clarity. Tanha, he taught, is the thirst that keeps us reaching for the glass even after we have been told it is empty. It is not that the reaching is bad. It is that the glass truly is empty, and no amount of reaching will fill it. Tanha is the engine of samsara, the endless cycle, and it runs on the fuel of, not yet, not enough, a little more. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha once described 3 kinds of craving. The craving for sensory pleasure, the craving for existence, and the craving for non-existence. When you are trying to let go of someone, you might experience all 3 of these at different moments. You crave their touch, their voice, the sensory pleasure of their nearness. You crave the existence of the relationship, the version of reality where you are still together, where the story has not ended. And sometimes, in the darkest hours, you might even crave non-existence, wishing you could simply disappear, simply stop feeling, simply cease to be the person who is in this much pain. If you have felt that last one, please hear this clearly: you are not alone in it, and it does pass. The night does end. The Buddha himself, in the years before his awakening, sat with despair so deep that it bordered on annihilation. He starved his body to the edge of death. He punished himself. He thought, surely, if he could just destroy enough of himself, the suffering would stop. But it did not. And it was only when he chose the middle way, neither indulgence nor destruction, that the path opened before him. So let us sit with this for a while, you and me. Let us not rush toward a lesson or a moral or a neat little bow to tie around the messiness of heartbreak. Let us just be here, in the truth of it. When you love someone, truly love them, you do not just love the person. You love the world as it exists with them in it. You love the Saturday mornings and the inside jokes and the way the light falls on their face at a certain hour. You love the future you imagined, the plans you sketched on the back of napkins, the children you might have had, the house you might have built, the old age you might have shared. When that person leaves, or when you must let them go, you are not just losing one person. You are losing an entire universe, a parallel life, a version of yourself that only existed in relation to them. And that is a grief worth honoring. The Buddha never minimized grief. There is a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya where a householder named Nakulapita comes to the Buddha, old and frail, and says, "Lord, I am weak, I am ill, and every time I cannot see the Blessed One, I become distressed." And the Buddha does not say, "Do not be distressed." He does not say, "Attachment is suffering, so stop being attached." He says, gently, "So it is, householder. This body is afflicted, and only a fool would claim a moment of health from it. Therefore, you should train yourself thus: though my body is sick, my mind shall not be sick." There is such tenderness in that response, such a recognition of the reality of pain, and yet such a gentle redirection toward the one thing we can actually work with, which is the mind, the heart, the inner landscape of our response. Letting go of someone does not mean you stop loving them. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of the Buddha's teaching on non-attachment. People hear, "let go," and they think it means, stop caring. They think it means becoming cold, indifferent, a stone Buddha statue with closed eyes and a serene smile that feels nothing. But that is not what the Buddha taught at all. The Buddha's heart was vast, immeasurably vast, and he loved all beings with a love called metta, a love that was boundless precisely because it did not cling. Letting go means releasing your grip on the outcome. It means allowing the person to be who they are, where they are, without needing them to be who you want them to be, where you want them to be. It means loving them the way you love the sunset, fully, completely, with your whole heart, while knowing, while accepting, that it will not stay. There is a lesser-known story from the Vinaya texts about a monk named Vakali, who was so devoted to the Buddha that he could not bear to be apart from him. Vakali did not come to the Sangha for the teachings. He came because he was captivated by the Buddha's physical presence, his radiance, his beauty. He would sit and stare at the Buddha for hours, utterly enchanted, and he would follow the Buddha from place to place like a shadow. One day, the Buddha turned to him and said, "Vakali, what is the use of gazing at this body of filth? Whoever sees the Dhamma sees me." Whoever sees me sees the Dhamma. And Vakali was crushed. He felt rejected. He climbed to the top of a cliff, intending to throw himself off, because he believed that the one person he loved most in the world had pushed him away. But the Buddha, sensing his anguish from afar, sent a projection of his image to Vakali and spoke to him with the tenderness of a mother calming a frightened child. He reminded Vakali that true connection is not found in the grasping of a physical form but in the understanding of truth itself. Vakali stepped back from the edge. He did not let go of his love for the Buddha, but he transformed it. He let go of his need for the Buddha's physical presence, and in doing so, he found the Buddha everywhere, in every moment of awareness, in every breath of mindfulness, in the turning of every leaf. That is what letting go looks like. Not the death of love, but its evolution. Not the end of connection, but its deepening into something that does not depend on proximity, on possession, on the desperate hope that someone will stay. But knowing this intellectually and feeling it in your bones are two very different things, are they not? You can read 1,000 books about letting go, you can nod your head at every teaching, and then you hear a song that they used to love, or you walk past the restaurant where you had your first date, or you wake up in the middle of the night and reach for them and find only empty sheets, and all that wisdom, all that understanding, dissolves like sugar in the rain. And you are back at the beginning, raw, aching, wondering if you will ever truly be free of this. The answer is yes. You will. But not in the way you might expect. Freedom from attachment does not come like a lightning bolt. It does not arrive in a single dramatic moment of release. It comes like the tide going out, so slowly that you barely notice, until one day you realize the water is no longer at your feet. It comes in small, almost invisible increments. One morning you wake up and you realize you did not think about them first thing. One afternoon you laugh at something, a real laugh, not a performance of happiness for the benefit of others, and you realize that the laugh had nothing to do with them. One evening you sit alone and the silence is not terrifying. It is just silence. And in these tiny, unremarkable moments, you begin to sense that the grip is loosening, not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. The Buddha called this process the cultivation of wisdom, panna, and he described it not as something you acquire from outside but as something you uncover from within. Wisdom is not added to you. It is revealed, like a lamp that was always burning behind a screen. When you remove the screen, the light is suddenly visible, but it was there all along. Your capacity to be whole, to be at peace, to be joyful without depending on another person for your joy, that has always been inside you. It did not arrive when they arrived, and it did not leave when they left. In the Therigatha, the collection of verses by the first Buddhist nuns, there is a poem by a woman named Sumangalamata. She was married to a man who treated her poorly, and she spent years in a household that felt like a prison. When she finally left and ordained as a nun, she wrote these lines, "Free, I am free. I am free from the pestle. I am free from my shameless husband. I am free from the sunshade he made me hold. I am free from his kettle. I am free." There is such raw joy in those lines, such uncontainable relief. She does not curse her husband. She does not dwell on bitterness. She simply celebrates the extraordinary lightness of having set down a burden she carried for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. That lightness is available to you too. Not necessarily through ordination or renunciation, but through the quiet, daily, sometimes painful practice of choosing yourself. Of choosing your own peace. Of recognizing that you are not a half waiting to be completed by another half. You are already whole. You have always been whole. The person you are trying to let go of, they showed you beautiful things about yourself, no doubt. They were a mirror in which you saw your own capacity for love, for tenderness, for vulnerability. But the mirror did not create those qualities. They were yours before, they are yours now, and they will be yours long after the memory of this heartbreak has softened into something you can hold without flinching. There is a teaching in the Sutta Nipata, one of the oldest texts in the Pali Canon, where the Buddha compares the ideal state of mind to the way a mother protects her only child. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Notice what he is saying here. He is not saying, do not love. He is saying, love bigger. He is saying that the love you feel for one person, that fierce, protective, all-consuming love, is not wrong. It is simply too small. Not too small in its intensity, but too small in its scope. It is like taking a river and forcing it through a straw. The river does not stop being a river, but the straw cannot hold it, and the pressure builds, and something breaks. When you let go of one person, you are not emptying your heart. You are widening it. You are allowing the love that was compressed into one narrow channel to flood outward in all directions. You begin to love your friends more deeply. You begin to notice strangers with a tenderness that surprises you. You begin to love yourself, perhaps for the first time, not as a consolation prize but as a genuine, worthy recipient of your own care. And here is something the Buddha understood that modern culture often misses: the pain of letting go is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is right with you. It means your heart is open. It means you are capable of deep feeling. It means you are alive in the fullest, most terrifying, most beautiful sense of the word. A heart that never aches is a heart that has never risked anything, and the Buddha did not teach us to avoid risk. He taught us to understand it, to meet it with awareness, and to walk through it with our eyes open. So if you are hurting tonight, if you are reading this with tears on your cheeks or a tightness in your throat, let it be. Do not fight it. Do not judge it. Do not tell yourself you should be over this by now, because there is no deadline for healing. There is no schedule for the heart. There is only this moment, and in this moment, you are doing the bravest thing a human being can do: you are feeling your feelings without running away from them. And that, friends, is the very essence of what the Buddha called sati, mindfulness. Not the mindfulness of sitting cross-legged on a cushion with incense burning and a gong ringing softly in the distance. But the raw, unglamorous, sometimes ugly mindfulness of sitting with your own pain and saying, I see you. I acknowledge you. I will not pretend you are not here. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha's most detailed teaching on mindfulness, he instructs practitioners to observe feelings as they arise and pass away, not to cling to pleasant feelings, not to push away unpleasant feelings, but to watch them all with the even, steady gaze of one who knows that everything, is impermanent. A feeling has arisen in me, the practitioner notes. A feeling is present in me. A feeling is passing away. That is all. No drama. No story. No, this feeling means I am a failure, or this feeling means I will never be happy again. Just the clean, clear observation of what is. And here is the miracle of that observation: when you watch a feeling without feeding it, without building a narrative around it, without adding fuel to its fire, it begins to change on its own. Not because you forced it to change, not because you pushed it away, but because that is the nature of feelings. They arise, they exist for a time, and they pass. Every single one of them. The bliss passes. The agony passes. The longing passes. The numbness passes. They are all guests in the house of your heart, and like all guests, they eventually leave. There is a beautiful image in the Milinda, a text recording a conversation between the monk Nagasena and the Greek king Milinda. The king asks Nagasena, "What is the characteristic of mindfulness?" And Nagasena answers, "Mindfulness, O king, has the characteristic of calling to mind." Just as the king's treasurer reminds the king of all his goods, saying, "You have so many elephants, so many horses, so many chariots, so many foot soldiers, so much gold, so much silver," so too does mindfulness call to mind all states as they are. The beauty of this metaphor is that the treasurer does not add or subtract from the king's wealth. He simply names what is there. And in the naming, the king gains clarity. He knows exactly where he stands. That is what mindfulness does for you in the midst of heartbreak. It does not take away the pain. But it shows you, with perfect honesty, what the pain actually is. It strips away the layers of story, the catastrophizing, the "I will never love again," and the "there is something fundamentally wrong with me," and it reveals the simple, bare, manageable truth beneath. Right now, in this moment, there is sadness. That is all. And sadness, though it feels infinite, is not infinite. It is one feeling, arising in one moment, and it will do what all feelings do. It will move through you and it will move on, the way clouds move across a sky that remains untouched by every storm that passes through it. You know, there is something that people rarely talk about when it comes to letting go, and that is the strange guilt that often accompanies it. You start to feel a little better one day, maybe you smile at a stranger, maybe you enjoy your morning coffee without that familiar ache in your chest, and then suddenly a wave of guilt crashes over you, as if feeling better is a betrayal. As if healing means you did not love them enough. As if moving forward means you are erasing everything you shared. And so you pull yourself back into the pain, almost deliberately, because the pain feels loyal. The pain feels like proof that what you had was real. The Buddha would have understood this so deeply. In the Khandha Samyutta, he taught about the 5 aggregates, the 5 components that make up what we call a self, and he showed how we cling to each one of them: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, as if they were permanent, as if they were truly ours. And one of the most subtle forms of clinging he identified was the clinging to suffering itself. We hold on to our pain because we have mistaken it for our identity. We think, "I am the person who lost this love. I am the person who was left behind. I am the person who was not enough." And that identity, painful as it is, feels solid. It feels real. And there is a strange comfort in solidity, even when that solidity is made of sorrow. But the Buddha gently, persistently, with the patience of rain wearing down a mountain, kept pointing out that none of these identities are permanent. None of them are truly you. The you who is grieving today is not the same you who fell in love 3 years ago. The you who fell in love 3 years ago is not the same you who will wake up 6 months from now with a heart that feels unexpectedly light. You are not a fixed point. You are a river, constantly flowing, constantly changing, and the grief you carry right now is not a permanent feature of the landscape. It is a season. And seasons, by their very nature, turn. There is a story in the Jataka Tales, the collection of the Buddha's past life stories, about a prince who fell deeply in love with a celestial being. She would visit him each night, descending from the heavens like moonlight taking human form, and they would spend hours together in a garden of jasmine and lotus. The prince lived for those nightly visits. He stopped eating properly, stopped attending to his duties, stopped engaging with the world. All he could think about, all he could feel, was the anticipation of her arrival and the devastation of her departure each dawn. One night, she did not come. He waited in the garden until the sun rose, and she did not come. He waited the next night, and the next, and the next. He waited for an entire month, growing thin, growing wild, growing hollow. The ministers of the kingdom brought him food, and he refused it. They brought him entertainment, and he ignored it. They brought him the finest physicians, and he sent them away. He was dying, not of illness, but of longing. Finally, a wandering sage came to the palace and asked to see the prince. He sat beside the prince in the garden and said, "Tell me, young prince, when she was here, were you happy?" The prince said, "Yes, the happiest I have ever been." The sage said, "And when she left each dawn, were you sad?" The prince said, "Unbearably so." The sage nodded and said, "Then your happiness was never truly yours. It was borrowed. It came when she came and left when she left. You were like a room that had no lamp of its own but depended entirely on the light coming through the window. When the window was open, you called it brightness. When the window was closed, you called it darkness. But the room itself never changed. The room was always the same room. You have simply forgotten that you have the ability to light your own lamp." The prince sat with those words for a long time. He did not immediately recover. He did not leap up and declare himself healed. But something in him shifted, a tiny movement, like the first crack in a seed before it sprouts. He began to consider the possibility that his joy did not have to be contingent on her presence. That somewhere inside him, buried beneath the rubble of his dependence, there was a light that belonged only to him. That story, though it comes from the mythological tradition of the Jatakas, carries a truth that is as practical and immediate as your next breath. How many of us have made another person our lamp? How many of us have handed someone else the responsibility for our happiness and then felt betrayed when they could not carry it? It is not their fault, you know. No human being was designed to be the sole source of another human being's joy. That is too much weight for any one person to bear, and when we place that weight on someone, we are not loving them. We are using them. We are making them an object, a tool for our own emotional survival, and that is a subtle form of violence that we rarely recognize because it wears the mask of devotion. The Buddha spoke about this in the Anguttara Nikaya when he described the difference between what he called near love and far love. Near love, which is more commonly translated as attachment, is the love that says, I need you close. I need you to be mine. I need you to fill this emptiness in me. Far love, which corresponds more closely to metta, or loving kindness, is the love that says, I wish you well, wherever you are, whoever you are with, whatever path you walk. Near love tightens. Far love opens. Near love creates prisons with walls made of need. Far love creates gardens without fences. And the extraordinary thing is that far love does not hurt less because it is distant. It actually loves more, because it is free from the contamination of selfishness. Let me share something else with you, something that might be uncomfortable to hear but is important nonetheless. Sometimes, the person we are struggling to let go of is not someone who was good for us. Sometimes, if we are very honest with ourselves, if we sit quietly and strip away the nostalgia and the selective memory and the romanticized highlight reel that our minds love to play on repeat, we can see that the relationship was not as golden as we remember. Maybe they were dismissive of your feelings. Maybe they made you feel small. Maybe they were kind in the beginning and cruel at the end, or kind in public and cold in private. Maybe the love was real, but it was also tangled up with fear, with insecurity, with patterns that neither of you knew how to break. And yet you still hold on. You still ache for them. You still catch yourself composing messages you will never send, rehearsing conversations that will never happen, replaying the good moments over and over while conveniently editing out the bad ones. And you wonder why, if they were not right for you, does it still hurt this much? The Buddha had an answer for this too, and it is found in his teaching on Vedana, or feeling tone. He taught that every experience has a feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and that we are wired to chase the pleasant and flee the unpleasant. When you were with that person, certain moments generated intensely pleasant feeling tones, the warmth of being held, the thrill of being desired, the comfort of not being alone. Your mind latched onto those feeling tones and filed them away as essential for survival. Not literally, of course, but emotionally, the brain treats the loss of a deeply pleasurable connection the same way it treats a physical threat. It panics. It grasps. It tells you that you need to get that feeling back at any cost. But here is what the Buddha saw that most of us miss: the pleasant feeling tone was never located in the other person. It was always in you. They were the condition that triggered it, yes, but the capacity for warmth, for comfort, for joy, for connection, all of that lives inside your own mind, your own heart, your own nervous system. They did not install those circuits in you. They simply activated circuits that were already there. And if those circuits were activated once, they can be activated again, by different conditions, by different connections, by the simple act of being alive and present and open to the beauty that is constantly, relentlessly, stubbornly surrounding you, even in your darkest moments. There is a passage in the Theragatha, the verses of the elder monks, that has always struck me as profoundly relevant to this topic. It was written by a monk named Talaputta, who before his ordination was an actor, a performer, someone who spent his entire life putting on masks and playing roles for the entertainment of others. When he finally came to the Buddha's teaching, he wrote, "For a long time, this mind of mine has been deceived, tricked, swindled by my own heart. For a long time, I ran after what was pleasing and fled from what was not. But now, enough. I see the game for what it is. I will not be fooled again. There is no bitterness in those words, despite how they might sound. There is clarity. Tallaputta is not angry at his mind for doing what minds do. He is simply acknowledging the pattern, and in acknowledging it, he is stepping outside of it. He is watching the magician from backstage and seeing how the trick is done. And once you see how the trick is done, you can still enjoy the show, but you are no longer fooled by it. That is what happens when you begin to understand why you are holding on. You start to see the mechanics of your attachment. You start to notice the moment when a memory arises and the craving follows, like a dog chasing a thrown ball, automatic, unthinking, conditioned. And instead of chasing the ball, instead of diving headlong into the memory and the longing and the fantasy of reunion, you pause. You breathe. You watch the ball bounce and roll and come to a stop. And you let it lie there. This is not suppression. This is not denial. This is wisdom. The Buddha drew a very clear distinction between suppression and wisdom, and it is a distinction that many people miss. Suppression says, I will not feel this. I will push it down, lock it away, pretend it does not exist. And suppression always fails, because feelings that are pushed down do not disappear. They ferment. They rot. They become resentment, bitterness, anxiety, depression. They leak out sideways in ways you do not expect, poisoning other relationships, sabotaging new opportunities, keeping you stuck in a cycle of avoidance that masquerades as strength. Wisdom, on the other hand, says, I will feel this fully. I will let it arise, let it exist, let it tell me whatever it needs to tell me. And then I will let it pass. Because it will pass. Everything passes. Wisdom does not resist the wave. Wisdom does not try to build a wall against it. Wisdom stands on the shore and watches the wave come and go, knowing that the shore was here before the wave and will be here after it. In the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha's teaching on mindfulness of breathing, he lays out a beautiful, step-by-step practice for working with feelings. He instructs the practitioner to breathe in and out while being sensitive to the entire body, then to calm the bodily formations, then to breathe in and out experiencing joy, then rapture, then mental formations, then calming mental formations, then experiencing the mind itself, then gladdening the mind, then concentrating the mind, then liberating the mind. And finally, he says, breathe in and out contemplating impermanence, contemplating dispassion, contemplating cessation, contemplating letting go. Notice that letting go comes last. It is not the first step. It is the culmination of a long, patient, systematic process of understanding. You do not jump to letting go. You arrive at it, naturally, organically, the way a fruit falls from a tree when it is ripe. You cannot force a fruit to ripen. You cannot stand at the base of the tree and shout at the apple to fall. You can only create the conditions, sunlight, water, time, patience, and then the ripening happens on its own. That is exactly how letting go of a person works. You do not force it. You do not set a deadline. You do not say, by next month, I will be over them. You simply create the conditions for healing, which are presence, honesty, self-compassion, and time, and you trust the process. The fruit will fall when it is ready. Your heart will release when it is ready. And no amount of self-punishment will accelerate the timeline. Speaking of self-compassion, This is something the Buddha taught with extraordinary emphasis, though it is often overlooked in favor of his more dramatic teachings on suffering and impermanence. In the Saddhaka Sutta, the Buddha tells the story of a pair of acrobats, a master and his apprentice, who perform atop a bamboo pole. The master says to the apprentice, "You watch over me, and I will watch over you, and in this way we will both be safe." But the apprentice, who is wiser than she appears, says, "No, master. Let each of us watch over ourselves, and in watching over ourselves, we watch over each other." The Buddha affirmed the apprentice's approach and said, "It is by watching over oneself that one watches over others. It is by watching over others that one watches over oneself." But the first part, the watching over oneself, is foundational. You cannot pour from an empty cup, as the modern saying goes, and the Buddha said essentially the same thing 2,500 years earlier with far more elegance. When you are trying to let go of someone, the temptation is to focus entirely on them. What are they doing? Are they happy? Have they moved on? Do they miss you? Are they with someone else? Your attention is pointed outward, like a searchlight sweeping the dark ocean, looking for a ship that has already sailed beyond the horizon. And while your attention is out there, desperately scanning for them, you are neglecting the one person who actually needs your attention right now, you. Turn the searchlight around. Point it inward. What do you need right now, in this moment? Not what do you need from them, but what do you need from yourself? Maybe you need rest. Maybe you need a good meal. Maybe you need to cry for a while without judging the tears. Maybe you need to call a friend, not to talk about the breakup, but to talk about something else entirely, to remind yourself that you have a life that extends beyond this pain. Maybe you need to go for a walk and feel the ground beneath your feet and look at the sky and remember that the world is vast, endlessly vast, and your story is not over. It is not even close to over. The Dhammapada, that most beloved collection of the Buddha's sayings, begins with these words: "Mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. If one speaks or acts with a corrupted mind, suffering follows, as the wheel follows the hoof of the ox. If one speaks or acts with a serene mind, happiness follows, as a shadow that never departs." Your mind, right now, is telling you a story. It is telling you a story about loss, about failure, about a future that will never be as bright as the past you are mourning. And because the mind is the forerunner of all actions, that story is shaping your entire experience. It is coloring everything you see, everything you do, everything you feel. But here is the thing about stories: they can be rewritten. Not by denying what happened, not by pretending the pain is not real, but by expanding the narrative to include what your mind is currently leaving out. Your mind is leaving out the mornings you will wake up feeling inexplicably lighter. It is leaving out the laughter that will catch you off guard 6 months from now. It is leaving out the stranger who will say something kind to you on a random Tuesday and make you feel seen in a way you had forgotten was possible. It is leaving out the version of you that is on the other side of this, stronger, softer, wider, deeper, more compassionate, more fully yourself than you have ever been. Your mind cannot see that version of you right now because it is too busy staring at the wound. But the wound is not the whole story. The wound is one chapter, and chapters end. There is a story in the Samyutta Nikaya about a monk named Channa, who was gravely ill and in terrible pain. He told his fellow monks that he could not bear the suffering, that he wanted to end his life. The monks were alarmed and went to the venerable Sariputta, who went to speak with Channa. Sariputta did not condemn him. He did not lecture him. He asked him gentle questions about his understanding of the Dhamma. And through that conversation, Channa arrived at a profound realization about the nature of feeling and consciousness. He saw, clearly, that his identification with the pain was causing more suffering than the pain itself. The pain was just pain. It was the story he was wrapping around the pain, the "I cannot bear this will never end, I am nothing but this suffering," that was truly unbearable. The distinction between pain and suffering is one of the Buddha's most revolutionary insights. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Pain is the raw sensation, the ache in the chest, the sting of loss, the hollow feeling when you reach for someone who is not there. Suffering is what you add to the pain, the narratives, the judgments, the projections, the catastrophizing, the belief that because it hurts now, it will hurt forever. You can have pain without suffering. It is possible. It is not easy, and it is not instant, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But it is possible, and millions of practitioners over 25 centuries have proven it. You feel the ache, and you let it ache. You feel the emptiness, and you let it be empty. You do not fill it with stories. You do not fill it with blame. You do not fill it with the obsessive review of everything you could have done differently. You simply sit with the emptiness and discover, to your astonishment, that emptiness is not the enemy. Emptiness is space. And space is where new things grow. In the garden of the Jetavana monastery, there was once a plot of land where nothing would grow. The soil was hard and compacted, packed down by years of foot traffic. The monks tried planting seeds there, but nothing took root. Then one of the monks, a former farmer, suggested that they stop planting and simply loosen the soil. Just break it up, aerate it, let the rain and air penetrate. They did this, and within a season, wildflowers appeared, flowers that no one had planted, flowers whose seeds had been lying dormant in the earth all along, waiting for the conditions to be right. Your heart after heartbreak is like that compacted soil. It feels hard, barren, incapable of producing anything beautiful. But the seeds are there. They have always been there. They are the seeds of your own resilience, your own joy, your own capacity for love. They do not need anyone else to plant them. They just need space, air, time, and a willingness to stop packing the soil down with the heavy feet of rumination and regret. Let me tell you about another teaching that I find particularly helpful when working with the pain of separation. The Buddha spoke extensively about what he called the 8 worldly conditions, or the 8 worldly winds: gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. He said that these 8 winds blow through every human life without exception, and that the untrained mind is tossed about by them like a leaf in a storm. But the trained mind, the mind that has developed equanimity, stands firm like a great mountain, feeling the wind but not being moved by it. When you lose someone you love, you are caught in several of these winds simultaneously. You are experiencing loss, certainly. You may be experiencing blame, either from others or from yourself. You are experiencing pain. And perhaps most insidiously, you are experiencing the loss of pleasure, the sudden absence of all those small, daily joys that the person's presence provided. The trained mind does not pretend these winds are not blowing. It does not stand in a hurricane and say, "What hurricane?" It acknowledges the winds, feels their force, and chooses not to be carried away by them. And how does one develop this kind of steadiness? Not through force. Not through gritting your teeth and clenching your jaw and willing yourself to be strong. But through the repeated, gentle, unglamorous practice of coming back to the present moment. Every time your mind races to the past, to the memories, to the what-ifs, and the if-onlys, you notice the racing, and you come back. Every time your mind leaps to the future, to the fear of loneliness, to the dread of never finding love again, you notice the leaping, and you come back. Back to this breath. Back to this moment. Back to the feel of the chair beneath you, the air in your lungs, the sound of these words in your ears. The present moment is the only place where you are safe from the tyranny of memory and the terrorism of anticipation. The present moment, right here, right now, is actually okay. Not perfect, perhaps, not blissful, but okay. Manageable. Survivable. And if this moment is survivable, then so is the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. That is how you get through this, not by conquering the entire mountain in a single leap, but by taking one step, and then another, each one no bigger than a single breath. There is a beautiful phrase that appears in the Itavataka, one of the shorter collections of the Buddha's sayings. The Buddha says, "This body is not yours, nor does it belong to others. It is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt." He is speaking about the physical body, but the principle extends to the heart as well. This heartbreak you are experiencing is not random. It is not punishment. It is the natural result of past actions, past choices, past patterns of clinging and craving that you may not even remember setting in motion. It is not your fault in the sense of blame, but it is your responsibility in the sense of response. You are the one who must feel it. You are the one who must work with it. You are the one who must, eventually, set it down. And you will. Not because someone tells you to. Not because you read a book or listened to a talk or received some magical piece of advice that unlocked the secret of releasing attachment. You will set it down because you are tired. Beautifully, honestly, simply tired of carrying it. And in that tiredness, there is not failure. There is grace. There is the quiet recognition that you have done enough, held on long enough, fought hard enough, and now it is time to open your hands and let the weight slide off your palms and rest on the ground where it belongs. The Buddha once compared the process of letting go to the way a snake sheds its skin. The snake does not rip its old skin off in a frenzy. It does not attack itself. It simply outgrows the skin, and the skin falls away naturally, revealing something new and fresh and tender beneath. You are outgrowing this attachment. It may not feel like growth. It may feel like agony. But growth and agony are not opposites. They are often companions, walking side by side, holding hands in the dark. There is another story, from the Dhammapada commentary, about a king named Mundra, who was so attached to his queen that when she died, he had her body preserved and placed in a glass coffin in his chambers. He would sit beside her body day after day, refusing to accept that she was gone, refusing to eat, refusing to govern, refusing to live. His ministers were desperate, and finally they brought a monk named Narada to the palace. Narada did not tell the king to stop grieving. He did not say, "She is gone, accept it." Instead, he said, "O king, tell me, do you know where she has gone?" The king said, "No." Narada said, "Then why do you grieve for someone whose destination you do not know? Perhaps she has been reborn in a heavenly realm. Perhaps she is at this very moment experiencing a joy so vast that your grief would puzzle her. You do not grieve for her sake. You grieve for your own." The king was startled by this, and Narada continued, "There is nothing wrong with missing someone. But when your missing becomes a refusal to live, you are not honoring her memory. You are imprisoning yourself in a shrine of sorrow, and she would not want that." Those words penetrated the king's grief like sunlight through a crack in a wall. He did not stop missing his queen. He did not suddenly feel fine. But he began to see that his grief, which he had believed was an expression of his love for her, was actually an expression of his fear of living without her. And those are very different things. Love says, "I am grateful for every moment we shared." Fear says, "I cannot survive without those moments." Love releases. Fear clutches. And the king, slowly, with the tenderness of a man learning to walk again after a long illness, began to choose love over fear. That choice is available to you in every moment. It is not a choice you make once and then it is done. It is a choice you make again and again, sometimes 100 times a day, sometimes 100 times an hour. Every time the memory surfaces, every time the longing pulls at you like a current beneath still water, you have a choice. You can follow the current down into the depths, into the familiar darkness of, "I need them, I cannot do this without them, I am nothing without them." Or you can acknowledge the current, feel its pull, and choose to stay on the surface, breathing, present, alive, here. Neither choice makes you a good or bad person. Neither choice makes you strong or weak. But one choice leads you deeper into suffering, and the other leads you, step by tiny step, toward freedom. And freedom, in the Buddhist sense, is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to feel everything without being destroyed by any of it. You know, there is a question that often arises when people begin to explore the idea of letting go, and it is a question that deserves an honest answer. The question is this: if I let go, does that mean the relationship meant nothing? Does that mean the love was not real? And the answer, the absolute and unequivocal answer, is no. Letting go does not diminish what you had. It does not erase it, does not cheapen it, does not render it meaningless. In fact, letting go is the highest tribute you can pay to a love that has run its course. It is the act of saying, what we had was so real, so precious, so worthy of respect, that I will not dishonor it by turning it into a chain. Think about it this way. When a flower blooms, it is beautiful. When the petals fall, the beauty does not retroactively disappear. The flower was still beautiful. The bloom still happened. The fragrance still filled the air. The fact that the petals are now on the ground does not negate the days when they were open and alive and dancing in the wind. The flower completed its cycle. It did what flowers do. And you can either rage at the petals for falling, or you can smile at the memory of their bloom and trust that new flowers will come in their season. The Buddha, in the Phagguna Sutta, addressed a monk who was struggling with exactly this kind of attachment. The monk Faguna had developed a deep personal bond with a group of nuns, and when other monks spoke critically of those nuns, Faguna would become angry and defensive. The Buddha called him aside and said, "Faguna, it is not fitting for you, a clansman who has gone forth out of faith from the home life into homelessness, to become angry and distressed when others speak about those nuns. If someone were to speak critically of me, would you become angry on my behalf?" Faguna admitted he would, and the Buddha said, "That, too, is not fitting. When others speak, whether praise or blame, you should simply discern what is true and what is false, and respond accordingly, without your heart being pulled this way and that by the words of others." What the Buddha was pointing to here is something subtle but crucial. He was not telling Faguna to stop caring about the nuns. He was telling him that his emotional reactivity, his inability to hear anything about them without being swept into a storm of feeling, was a sign of attachment, not love. Love would allow him to care for the nuns and also remain centered. Attachment required him to be destabilized by every perceived threat to the connection. When you are attached to someone, your emotional equilibrium depends on them. Their mood becomes your mood. Their silence becomes your anxiety. Their absence becomes your crisis. And that is an exhausting, unsustainable way to live. It is like building your house on someone else's land. No matter how beautiful the house, no matter how carefully you construct it, you do not own the ground it stands on, and it can be taken from you at any time. The Buddha invited us to build our house on our own land. To find our own ground. To develop what he called an island unto yourself, a phrase from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, his final teaching before passing away. Lying on his side between two sala trees, knowing that his body would fail within hours, the Buddha said to his disciples, "Be islands unto yourselves. Be refuges unto yourselves. Take no other refuge. Let the Dhamma be your island. Let the Dhamma be your refuge. Take no other refuge." These were among his last words. And even in his final moments, he was not saying, "Do not love." He was saying, "Do not make another person the foundation of your being, because every person, every body, every form, is subject to change, to decay, to dissolution." Even the Buddha himself was subject to these laws. He did not exempt himself. He did not say, "I am the awakened one, and therefore I will live forever." He lay down, he closed his eyes, and he entered the peace of parinibbana, leaving behind a community of thousands who loved him deeply and who had to face, in that moment, the very thing he had been teaching them about for 45 years, the reality of impermanence. Imagine being Ananda, the Buddha's closest attendant, his constant companion for 25 years. Ananda, who had walked beside the Buddha through countless villages, who had listened to every teaching, who had fetched his water and arranged his seat and stood guard while he slept. Ananda, who loved the Buddha not as a distant, untouchable deity, but as a friend, a brother, a person whose smile could light up an entire assembly. When the Buddha announced that he would pass away in 3 months, Ananda went behind a building and wept. He wept and could not stop. And the Buddha, hearing of this, called Ananda to him and said, "Enough, Ananda. Do not grieve. Do not lament. Have I not taught you that all things dear and beloved are subject to change, to separation? How could it be, Ananda, that what is born, what has come into being, what is conditioned, should not pass away. That is not possible. And then the Buddha did something extraordinary. He did not leave it at that philosophical statement. He turned to the assembled monks and said, "Monks, all those Buddhas who came before me also had an attendant as devoted, as faithful, as Ananda. But Ananda is the wisest of them all. He knows the right time to approach, the right time to speak, the right time to be silent. Monks, Ananda is a rare treasure." He praised him. He honored him. He acknowledged the depth and beauty of their connection. He did not pretend that his relationship with Ananda was just another impersonal arrangement to be discarded without feeling. He loved Ananda. He simply loved him without clinging to him, and he taught Ananda, through his own dying, that love and impermanence are not enemies. They are dance partners. That is the teaching, right there, in the life and death of the Buddha himself. You can love fiercely and still let go gracefully. You can cherish someone with every fiber of your being and still acknowledge, with peace rather than despair, that the time for closeness has passed. These are not contradictions. They are the mark of a mature heart, a heart that has been broken enough times to know that breaking is not the same as being destroyed. And speaking of being broken, let me share with you something that you might find comforting, or at least thought-provoking. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha speaks of 5 things that are impossible to find in this world. One of them is that it is impossible to find a being who has not, at some point in the long cycle of rebirth, been your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your son, your daughter, your lover, your dearest friend. Every being you have ever met, every stranger on the street, every person who cuts you off in traffic, every soul who annoys you or delights you or confuses you, has at some point been your most beloved. And you have been theirs. This means that the person you are trying to let go of right now, the one whose name still catches in your throat, they have been connected to you in ways that go far deeper than this single lifetime. And they will be connected to you again, in forms you cannot predict, in lives you cannot imagine. This is not a reason to hold on. It is, paradoxically, a reason to release. Because if the connection is that deep, that ancient, that indestructible, then it does not need your desperate grip to survive. It exists beyond your clinging. It exists in a dimension that your anxiety cannot touch. You do not need to chase what is already woven into the fabric of your being. You do not need to clutch at what cannot be lost. The love, the real love, the love that exists beneath the surface drama of coming and going, staying and leaving, that love is permanent in a way that no form, no body, no relationship status can be. It is the love that the Buddha pointed to when he taught metta, loving kindness without condition, without boundary, without the fatal clause of only if you stay. Now, there is another layer to this that is worth exploring, and it has to do with the stories we tell ourselves about why the relationship ended. The human mind is a meaning-making machine. It cannot simply experience events. It must interpret them, explain them, weave them into a narrative that makes sense. And so when a relationship ends, the mind immediately begins constructing a story. They left because I was not enough. They left because I was too much. They left because I said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, loved in the wrong way. They left because I am fundamentally unlovable. These stories feel like truth, but they are not truth. They are constructions. They are the mind's attempt to create order out of chaos, to find a reason, a cause, a blame. Because if there is a reason, then the mind feels it has some control. If I can figure out what I did wrong, the mind thinks, then I can fix it, or at least avoid making the same mistake next time. But the Buddha taught that the arising and passing of all phenomena, including relationships, is the result of an inconceivably complex web of causes and conditions, not a single cause, not a single fault, not a simple story with a hero and a villain. In the Asuttava Sutta, the Buddha describes the uninstructed, ordinary person as someone who, when contacted by a painful feeling, sorrows, grieves, laments, beats their breast, and becomes distraught. They are struck by two arrows, he says. The first arrow is the painful feeling itself, the raw, unavoidable pain of loss. The second arrow is the mental reaction, the story, the self-blame, the catastrophizing, the "this means I am worthless" narrative that the mind wraps around the pain like barbed wire around a wound. The instructed disciple, the Buddha says, is struck only by the first arrow. They feel the pain. They do not pretend it is not there. But they do not add the second arrow. They do not compound the pain with stories, judgments, and projections. And this makes an enormous difference, because the first arrow, the raw pain of loss, is bearable. It hurts, but it is clean pain, simple pain, honest pain. It is the second arrow, the mental elaboration, that turns bearable pain into unbearable suffering. So if you find yourself spiraling into self-blame right now, if you find the voice in your head telling you that you are the reason it all fell apart, try to notice that voice for what it is. It is the second arrow. It is the story, not the reality. The reality is that a relationship ended. That is all. It ended because a million causes and conditions converged in a way that made its continuation impossible. Not because you are deficient. Not because you are unworthy. Not because the universe has singled you out for punishment. It ended the way a candle goes out when the wax is spent, not because the flame was weak, but because the conditions for its burning were no longer present. And this brings us to one of the most profound and misunderstood concepts in all of Buddhist philosophy, sunyata, emptiness. Now, before you tune out because this sounds abstract and philosophical, let me assure you that emptiness, as the Buddha taught it, is the most practical, most immediately relevant teaching you will ever encounter, especially when it comes to heartbreak. Emptiness does not mean that nothing exists. It does not mean that your love was not real or that your pain is an illusion. What emptiness means is that nothing exists independently, in and of itself, from its own side, without depending on other things. Everything arises in dependence upon conditions. Your relationship arose in dependence upon conditions, the condition of meeting, the condition of attraction, the condition of shared interests, the condition of timing, the condition of emotional availability, the condition of 1,000 tiny factors that aligned in just the right way at just the right moment to create the experience of us. And when those conditions changed, as conditions always do, the relationship changed with them. Not because someone failed. Not because love was not enough. But because that is how conditioned phenomena work. They arise when conditions are present, and they cease when conditions are absent. The sun does not fail when it sets. The rain does not fail when it stops. The flower does not fail when it wilts. They simply respond to the changing conditions of their existence. And so do relationships. And so do you. Understanding this, truly understanding it, not just intellectually but in the marrow of your bones, is the beginning of a peace that does not depend on circumstances. It is the peace that the Buddha called the peace beyond conditions, the peace that remains even when the storms of gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain are raging all around you. It is not a peace you have to earn or achieve. It is a peace you uncover when you stop adding layers of narrative to the raw experience of your life. There is a lesser-known story from the Chinese Buddhist tradition about a poet-monk named Hans Han, Cold Mountain, who lived as a hermit in the Tiantai Mountains. Hans Han was known for his eccentric behavior and his startlingly direct poetry, which he would write on rocks and trees and cliff faces. One of his poems says something like this: "I tried to hold the moonlight in my hand, and my hand was full of light, and then I closed my fingers, and the light slipped through, and my hand was dark, and I laughed, because the moon was still there, right above me, shining as it always had, and it was only my closed fist that was dark." That image, the closed fist and the moonlight, captures something essential about attachment and release. When you try to possess the light, to trap it, to make it yours alone, you end up in darkness, not because the light has left, but because your grip has blocked it. When you open your hand, the light returns, not because you summoned it, but because it was never truly gone. It was always there, waiting for you to stop grasping. The person you love is like that moonlight. Their warmth, their kindness, the way they made you feel alive, none of that disappears when you open your hand. It simply changes form. It becomes a memory that warms rather than burns. It becomes a gratitude that sustains rather than consumes. It becomes a tenderness toward yourself and toward the world that would not have been possible if you had never loved them at all. And you know what? There is something incredibly beautiful about being a person who has loved deeply and lost and survived. There is a depth to you now that was not there before. There is a compassion in your eyes that comes only from having known pain firsthand. When you meet someone else who is grieving, you do not offer them platitudes. You do not say, "Everything happens for a reason," or "Time heals all wounds." You sit with them. You hold space for them. You say, without words, "I know. I have been there. And you will get through this, not because I can prove it to you, but because I am proof of it." The Buddha's entire teaching career was, in a sense, an act of this kind of testimony. He was a man who had known the extremes of pleasure and the extremes of pain, who had sat with despair so total that it bordered on nihilism, and who had come through it, not unscathed, but awake. And from that awakening, he spent 45 years sitting with others in their pain, not above them, not beyond them, but beside them, saying, in effect, "I understand. And there is a way through." That way through is not a straight line. It is not a march of progress from grief to acceptance in a neat, predictable sequence. It is more like a spiral, circling back again and again to the same pain, the same longing, the same empty space where they used to be, but each time circling back at a slightly different altitude, seeing it from a slightly different angle, feeling it with a slightly different quality of awareness. And over time, almost imperceptibly, the spiral widens, and the pain that once filled your entire field of vision becomes one element in a much larger landscape. You begin to notice things you had stopped noticing. The way the morning light looks on the kitchen wall. The taste of food, really tasting it, not just mechanically chewing while your mind replays the greatest hits of your relationship. The sound of birds, which has been there all along, patient and persistent, singing whether you were happy or heartbroken. The feeling of your own body, this miraculous, temporary, imperfect body that has carried you through everything, every joy, every sorrow, every moment of this wild, unpredictable life. In the Kayagatasati Sutta, the Buddha teaches mindfulness of the body as a foundation for all other mindfulness practices. He describes becoming aware of the body while walking, while standing, while sitting, while lying down. He describes becoming aware of the breath entering and leaving the body. He describes becoming aware of the body's impermanence, its changing nature, its ultimate dissolution. And far from being morbid, this practice is profoundly grounding. It brings you home to the one place you can always return to, no matter how far your mind has wandered into the past or the future, the present, living, breathing body. When you are in the grip of heartbreak, your body knows it before your mind does. Your chest tightens. Your stomach churns. Your shoulders creep up toward your ears. Your jaw clenches. Your breath becomes shallow and tight, as if your lungs are afraid to expand fully, afraid that a full breath might let in too much feeling. And the instinct is to flee from these sensations, to distract yourself, to numb yourself, to scroll through your phone or pour another drink or binge another show, anything to avoid the raw physical reality of what you are going through. But what if you did the opposite? What if, just for a moment, you stopped running and turned toward the sensations? What if you placed your hand on your chest, felt the heartbeat beneath your palm, and said to yourself, with genuine kindness, this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. That is not a Buddhist mantra. That is not a religious formula. That is simply the act of treating yourself the way you would treat a dear friend who came to you in pain. You would not tell your friend to toughen up. You would not tell your friend to get over it. You would hold their hand. You would listen. You would be present. Why do you deserve any less from yourself? The Buddha, in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, describes the cultivation of loving kindness as beginning with the wish, may I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be at peace. Not, may that person come back. Not, may the relationship be restored. Not, may things go back to the way they were. But simply, tenderly, radically, may I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be at peace. And from that foundation of self-directed kindness, the practice expands outward, to loved ones, to neutral people, to difficult people, and eventually to all beings everywhere, without exception. But it starts with you. It always starts with you. And starting with yourself is not selfish. It is essential. The oxygen mask analogy is overused, but it endures because it is true. You must breathe before you can help others breathe. You must find your own ground before you can offer stability to anyone else. And here is something that may surprise you: letting go of someone can actually deepen your capacity for love, not diminish it. Every attachment you release, every clinging you soften, every grasping you loosen, creates space in your heart that was not there before. And into that space, life rushes. Not the life you planned, not the life you imagined, but the life that is actually here, actually available, actually unfolding in front of you right now, if only you would look up from the screen of your memories long enough to see it. The Buddha compared the untrained mind to a wild horse, careening from one distraction to the next, chasing pleasure, fleeing pain, never still, never satisfied. And he compared the trained mind to a horse that has been gently, patiently guided, not broken, not forced, but guided, until it can walk calmly through any landscape without panic. Your heart right now may feel like a wild horse. It is rearing and kicking and trying to gallop back to a pasture that no longer exists. And that is okay. Wild horses are magnificent. But they are also exhausting, for themselves and for everyone around them. And there comes a time when even the wildest horse grows tired of running and stands still, breathing hard, nostrils flaring, and discovers that stillness is not a trap. Stillness is where rest lives, where clarity lives, where the kind of strength that does not depend on speed or force or forward motion quietly takes root. You might be wondering, at this point, whether the Buddha ever addressed the specific experience of romantic attachment, the kind of love that makes your palms sweat and your mind race and your whole body feel like it is on fire with wanting. The answer is yes, and he did so with a subtlety and compassion that is often lost in the more austere presentations of his teaching. In the Samyutta Nikaya, there is a teaching where the Buddha uses the analogy of a lute. He asks a monk, if the strings of a lute are too tight, is the lute in tune? Is it playable? The monk says no. And if the strings are too loose, is the lute in tune? Is it playable? Again, no. But if the strings are neither too tight nor too loose, if they are tuned to the right pitch, then the lute produces beautiful music. The Buddha then applies this to the mind, neither too tense nor too lax, neither too attached nor too detached, but balanced, poised, responsive. This teaching is often applied to meditation practice, but it applies equally to the heart. When you are in the throes of attachment, your strings are too tight. Every touch, every word, every glance from the person you love reverberates through you with a painful intensity. And when you try to force detachment, to make yourself stop caring through sheer willpower, your strings go slack, and the music dies, and you become numb, hollow, disconnected from your own emotional life. Neither extreme produces harmony. What produces harmony is the middle way, the place where you can feel deeply without drowning, where you can love fully without losing yourself. Finding that middle way in the context of heartbreak is not a theoretical exercise. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, practice of calibration. Some moments you will be too tight, consumed by longing, and you will need to consciously loosen your grip, take a breath, remind yourself that this feeling is temporary. Other moments you will be too loose, dissociated, going through the motions of your life without actually being present in it, and you will need to consciously tune back in, feel the ground beneath your feet, let yourself care about something, even something small, a cup of tea, a bird singing outside the window, the warmth of sunlight on your arm. The Buddha was the supreme master of this calibration, and he taught it not through grand gestures but through the most ordinary details of daily life. In the Bojjhana Sutta, he taught about mindful eating, not as a dietary philosophy but as a practice of attention. The wise practitioner, he said, eats with awareness, knowing, this food nourishes the body, which allows me to continue on the path. He was teaching people to find meaning and presence in the simplest acts. And when your heart is broken, the simple acts become lifelines. The making of breakfast, the folding of clothes, the washing of dishes, these are not mundane distractions from your grief. They are anchors in reality. They are proof that life goes on, that your hands still work, that your body still functions, that you are still here, still capable, still part of the living world. There is a teaching attributed to Layman Pang, one of the great Chan Buddhist practitioners of ancient China, who said, "My supernatural power and marvelous activity is drawing water and carrying firewood." He was not being ironic. He was pointing to the extraordinary depth that can be found in ordinary tasks when they are performed with full presence and attention. When you are carrying firewood, just carry firewood. When you are drawing water, just draw water. And when you are grieving, just grieve. Do not grieve and simultaneously analyze the grief and judge the grief and project the grief into the future and compare the grief to some imagined standard of how long it should last. Just grieve. Cleanly. Simply. One moment at a time. I want to share another story with you, one that comes from the Avadana literature, the collection of heroic tales from early Buddhist tradition. There was once a merchant's daughter named Rupananda, who was famed throughout the kingdom for her extraordinary beauty. She was vain about her appearance, and her entire identity was constructed around the admiration she received. When she was young, princes and nobles competed for her attention, and she reveled in it. Her beauty was her currency, her power, her sense of self. As the years passed, Rupananda heard about the Buddha and his teachings, but she refused to go and listen. She had heard that the Buddha spoke about the impermanence of the body, about the fading of youth and beauty, and she wanted no part of such depressing talk. She clung to her reflection the way you might cling to a person, desperately, fearfully, with the unspoken belief that without it, she would be nothing. Eventually, through the gentle persuasion of her family, she agreed to attend one of the Buddha's discourses. And the Buddha, who had the ability to perceive the specific attachments that held each person captive, used his meditative powers to create an image, a vision visible only to Rupananda, of a woman even more beautiful than she was. Rupananda was mesmerized. She could not take her eyes off this radiant woman. And then, slowly, the Buddha allowed the image to age. The woman's hair turned gray. Her skin wrinkled. Her posture stooped. Her radiance dimmed. And finally, the image collapsed and died, right before Rupananda's eyes. Rupananda was shattered. Not because the image was horrifying, but because she suddenly saw, with crystal clarity, what she had been running from her entire life. She saw that everything she had based her identity on, her beauty, her youth, the admiration of others, was as temporary as a candle flame in a windstorm. And in that seeing, something released. Not gradually, but all at once, like a knot that had been tightened for years suddenly coming loose. She wept, and then she laughed, and then she asked the Buddha to accept her into the order, and she went on to become one of the most deeply realized nuns of her generation. Why do I tell you this story? Because the person you are trying to let go of is, in a sense, your mirror. Just as Rupananda's beauty was the mirror in which she saw her worth, the person you loved became the mirror in which you saw your lovability, your desirability, your value as a human being. And when the mirror is taken away, you feel as if you have lost not just a person but your entire reflection. You do not know who you are without them looking at you. You do not know what you are worth without them telling you, through their presence, through their touch, through their choosing to be with you, that you are worth something. But here is the truth that Rupananda discovered and that you can discover too: you do not need a mirror to exist. You do not need another person's gaze to have a face. You do not need another person's love to be lovable. These qualities are inherent. They are not granted by someone else and revoked when they leave. They are yours, permanently, indestructibly, unconditionally. The Buddha spoke about this inherent worth in many different ways, but one of the most powerful is found in the concept of Buddha nature, the idea that every sentient being contains within them the seed of awakening, the potential for complete and perfect understanding. This seed is not something you earn. It is not something you develop through good behavior or spiritual practice. It is already there, fully present, fully formed, simply obscured by the clouds of ignorance, craving, and aversion. And just as the sun does not stop existing because clouds are covering it, your essential worth, your fundamental goodness, your capacity for joy and love and peace does not stop existing because grief is temporarily obscuring it. You are still you. The you who laughs at silly jokes, the you who gets inexplicably emotional during certain songs, the you who stays up too late reading or watching something you love, the you who has dreams and fears and hopes and quirks that no one else in the history of the universe has ever had or ever will have in exactly the same combination. That you is still here. That you did not leave when they left. That you is sitting right here, right now, reading these words, breathing, alive, impossibly, wonderfully alive. And I want to say something about that aliveness, because it matters. The Buddha, for all his talk of suffering and impermanence and the unsatisfactory nature of conditioned existence, was not a pessimist. He was, if anything, the ultimate realist, and his realism led him not to despair but to a joy so deep and stable that nothing could shake it. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, even as his body was failing, even as he lay between the solid trees taking his final breaths, the monks who were present reported that his face was serene, peaceful, radiating a quiet contentment that had nothing to do with his physical condition and everything to do with the quality of his mind. That serenity is available to you. Not in its fullest, most perfected form, perhaps, not right now, not in the middle of heartbreak. But in glimpses. In flashes. In those unexpected moments when the pain lifts for a second and you catch a breath of something lighter, something freer, something that feels like the first warm day after a long winter. Those moments are not accidents. They are previews. They are your own Buddha nature peeking through the clouds, waving at you, saying, I am still here. I have always been here. And I am waiting for you, whenever you are ready. Let me tell you about the concept of upekkha, which is often translated as equanimity, though that English word does not quite capture the warmth and depth of the Pali original. Upekkha is not indifference. It is not the cold detachment of someone who has numbed themselves to feeling. It is the balanced, tender, wide-open awareness of someone who has learned to hold all of life, the beautiful and the painful, the gain and the loss, the meeting and the parting, with equal grace. The Buddha described upekkha as one of the 4 Brahmaviharas, the 4 divine abodes, alongside metta, karuna, and mudita, which are loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. Notice that equanimity is listed last, not because it is the least important, but because it is the most difficult, the most mature, the culmination of the other 3. You begin with loving kindness, wishing yourself and others well. You move to compassion, feeling the suffering of others and wishing them free of it. You develop sympathetic joy, celebrating the happiness of others without envy or resentment. And finally, you arrive at equanimity, the ability to hold it all, the joy and the sorrow, the love and the loss, without being tipped over by any of it. Equanimity in the context of letting go does not mean you feel nothing about the person leaving. It means you feel everything, the love, the loss, the gratitude, the pain, and you hold it all in a space that is large enough to contain it without being consumed by it. It is the difference between being in the ocean and being the ocean. When you are in the ocean, every wave tosses you, every current pulls you, every storm threatens to drown you. When you are the ocean, the waves are still there, the currents are still there, the storms are still there, but they are all happening within you, and you are vast enough to hold them all. Developing this vastness takes time. It takes practice. It takes the willingness to sit with discomfort and not flee from it. But it also takes something else, something that the Buddha emphasized over and over again, and that is Sangha, community. You do not have to do this alone. You were never meant to do this alone. In the Upatishapadasini, the Venerable Ananda once said to the Buddha, "Lord, this is half of the holy life, good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship." And the Buddha corrected him with a response that has echoed through the centuries, "Do not say that, Ananda. Do not say that. Good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship is not half of the holy life. It is the whole of the holy life. The whole of the holy life. Not a supplement to the path. Not a nice bonus. The whole thing." The Buddha was saying that we awaken together, or we do not awaken at all. We heal together, or we do not heal at all. We let go together, or we stay stuck alone in the prison of our own rumination. So if you are trying to let go of someone right now, please, do not try to do it in isolation. Do not shut yourself away in your room with your memories and your regrets and your phone full of old photographs. Reach out. Not necessarily to talk about the breakup, though that can help too, but simply to be in the presence of other human beings who care about you. Let them remind you that you are loved, that you are valued, that you exist in a web of relationships that extends far beyond the one you are mourning. Let them cook for you. Let them make you laugh. Let them sit with you in silence when there are no words that will help. Let them be your Sangha, your community, your proof that you are not alone in this enormous, bewildering, heartbreakingly beautiful world. There is a story in the Vinaya Pitaka about a monk who fell ill with a severe stomach ailment. He was lying in his own filth, too weak to move, and the other monks avoided him because his condition was unpleasant and frightening. The Buddha, hearing of this, went to the monk's quarters, washed him with his own hands, changed his robes, made his bed, and nursed him back to health. Then the Buddha called the monks together and said, "Monks, you have no mother, you have no father to look after you. If you do not look after one another, who will look after you? Whoever would tend to me, let them tend to the sick." That simple act, the Buddha kneeling on the floor, washing a sick monk's body, tells you everything you need to know about the kind of love the Buddha embodied. It was not abstract. It was not philosophical. It was not a sermon delivered from a safe distance. It was hands in dirty water. It was sleeves rolled up. It was the willingness to be present in the mess, in the smell, in the discomfort of another person's suffering. And that is the kind of love that heals. Not the romantic, cinematic, all-consuming love that we are conditioned to idealize, but the quiet, humble, unglamorous love that shows up and stays, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is difficult, even when there is no reward. That is the kind of love you deserve. Not just from others, but from yourself. Can you be your own Buddha, kneeling beside your own suffering, washing it gently, tending to it without disgust or impatience? Can you say to yourself, with the same tenderness the Buddha showed to that sick monk, I see you. I am here. I will take care of you. You are worth taking care of. If that feels difficult, if self-compassion feels like a foreign language that you never learned to speak, that is okay. Most of us were never taught it. We were taught to be productive, to be resilient, to be tough, to push through, to keep going no matter what. We were not taught to be gentle with ourselves. We were not taught that gentleness is a form of strength, perhaps the highest form, because it requires the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to admit that you are hurting, the courage to ask for help. The Buddha's own journey to enlightenment was, in many ways, a journey from harshness to gentleness. Before his awakening, he practiced severe austerities. He starved himself until his spine was visible through his stomach. He held his breath until he thought his head would explode. He pushed his body and mind to the absolute breaking point, believing that liberation lay on the other side of self-punishment. And it did not work. It brought him nothing but more suffering. It was only when he abandoned the path of self-torture and accepted the simple gift of a bowl of rice milk from a village girl named Sujata that the final phase of his journey began. He sat down beneath the Bodhi tree, not as a warrior going into battle, but as a tired man sitting down to rest. And from that place of rest, from that place of gentleness, from that place of finally being kind to himself, he saw through the illusion that had kept him trapped, and he woke up. Maybe that is what you need right now. Not a battle plan for getting over someone. Not a strategy for moving on. Not a timeline or a checklist or a set of rules. Maybe what you need is a bowl of rice milk. Maybe what you need is to stop punishing yourself for loving someone, to stop beating yourself up for not being over it yet, to stop treating your heart like an enemy that needs to be conquered and start treating it like a friend that needs to be fed. What does your rice milk look like? Maybe it is a long walk in the early morning, before the world is awake, when the air is cool and the streets are quiet and you can hear your own footsteps. Maybe it is a book that has nothing to do with relationships or self-improvement, just a story that carries you away for a while. Maybe it is music, the kind that does not remind you of them, the kind that belongs only to you, to the version of you that existed before they entered your life and will continue to exist long after the ache has faded. Maybe it is just sleep, deep and uninterrupted, the kind of sleep that your body has been begging for while your mind has been replaying conversations at 3 in the morning. Whatever it is, give it to yourself without guilt. You are not betraying anyone by taking care of yourself. You are not moving on too fast. You are not being disloyal to the memory of what you had. You are doing what every living being does. You are tending to your own survival, your own healing, your own quiet, persistent blooming. There is a verse in the Dhammapada that says, "You yourself must strive." The Buddhas only point the way. That verse is not a burden. It is an empowerment. It is saying that you have within you everything you need to walk through this. No one can walk through it for you, that is true. No one can feel your feelings for you, or grieve your grief for you, or let go on your behalf. But you can do it. You are doing it, right now, in this very moment, whether you realize it or not. Every breath you take is a tiny act of letting go. You breathe in, and you hold the air for a moment, and then you release it. You do not try to keep it. You do not panic when it leaves your lungs. You trust that another breath will come. And it does. It always does. What if you could trust the same way with love? What if you could breathe in the love, hold it for as long as it is given, and then release it when it is time, trusting that more love will come? Not the same love, not the same person, but love in a new form, a new shape, a new breath drawn from the infinite reservoir of tenderness that the universe never runs out of. The Buddha trusted this way. He loved and he released and he loved again, not the same person, not the same form, but the same boundless, unconditional, wide-open love, directed at all beings equally, without preference, without exclusion, without the desperate need for any particular being to stay. And his heart was not empty because of this. His heart was, by all accounts, the fullest heart that has ever beaten in a human chest. Your heart, too, is fuller than you know. Right now, it feels like it has a hole in it, a space where someone used to live, and the emptiness of that space feels intolerable. But what if the emptiness is not around? What if it is a door? What if the space that was opened by their leaving is not something to be filled but something to be entered, explored, inhabited? What if you walked through that door and found, on the other side, a version of yourself that you have never met, a version that is freer, wilder, more authentically alive than the version that was defined by a relationship? I am not saying this to minimize your loss. I am not saying this to rush you through your grief. I am saying this because the Buddha's entire teaching can be summarized in 2 words: look deeper. Look deeper than the surface of your pain. Look deeper than the story your mind is telling you. Look deeper than the belief that you are broken, that you are incomplete, that you need someone else to make you whole. Look deeper and you will find, beneath all of it, a wholeness that was never broken, a light that was never extinguished, a love that was never lost because it was never dependent on anyone else's presence to exist. In the Ratana Sutta, the Buddha speaks of the jewel within, the treasure that every being carries but most never discover because they are too busy looking for treasure outside themselves. There is a jewel in the Dhamma, he says. There is a jewel in the Sangha. There is a jewel in the Buddha. And the jewel in the Buddha is not the historical person, not the physical body that walked the dusty roads of ancient India. The jewel is the quality of awakening itself, which exists within every sentient being, waiting to be uncovered. You carry jewels within you that you have not yet discovered. Not because they are hidden, but because you have been looking in the wrong direction. You have been looking at another person, hoping to see your own brilliance reflected in their eyes. But the brilliance is not in their eyes. It is in yours. It has always been in yours. And when the grief clears, and the fog lifts, and the endless replay of memories finally fades to a gentle hum in the background of your life, you will look in the mirror and see, perhaps for the first time, the extraordinary, unrepeatable, irreplaceable being that you are. And you will wonder how you ever believed that this being, this you, this miracle of consciousness and feeling and aliveness, could be diminished by the departure of any other being, no matter how loved, no matter how missed, no matter how deeply woven into the fabric of your days and nights and dreams they once were. There is a moment in the grieving process that nobody warns you about, a moment that is equal parts terrifying and liberating, and that is the moment when you realize you are starting to forget. Not forget the person entirely, not forget their name or their face, but forget the small things. The exact pitch of their laugh. The way they stirred their coffee, clockwise or counterclockwise. The particular word they always mispronounced, the one that used to make you smile every time. These details, which once felt as permanent as stone carvings in your memory, begin to soften at the edges, blur, fade, like ink left out in the rain. And when you notice this fading, your first instinct is panic. You scramble to hold on. You dig through old photographs, old messages, old voicemails, trying to reconstruct the details before they dissolve completely. Because forgetting feels like a second loss, a loss within a loss, as if the person is dying all over again, not in the world but in your mind, which was the last place they still lived. But here is what the Buddha would gently, carefully, compassionately point out: this fading is not a failure. It is not a betrayal. It is the mind doing exactly what minds do, which is change. The mind is not a photograph. It is not a museum. It is a living, breathing, constantly evolving process, and it no more holds on to memories perfectly than a river holds on to the exact shape of its current. The water that passed through this bend yesterday is not the same water that passes through it today. And the mind that held those memories a year ago is not the same mind that holds them now. This does not mean the memories are not real. They were real. They were gloriously, heartbreakingly, beautifully real in the moments they occurred. But reality and permanence are not the same thing. The Buddha made this distinction over and over, and it is one of the most important distinctions in all of his teaching. Something can be utterly real and utterly impermanent at the same time. A rainbow is real. You can see it, point to it, be moved by it. But it is also impermanent. It arises when certain conditions are present, sunlight and moisture and a particular angle of vision, and it fades when those conditions change. Does the fading of the rainbow mean it was not real? Of course not. It was real in the moment of its appearing, and its reality is not diminished by its passing. Your love was a rainbow. It was real. It was beautiful. And it has faded, not because it was false, but because the conditions that created it have changed. Let it be a rainbow. Let it be something you once looked up and saw in the sky, something that made you gasp, something that made the ordinary world shimmer with color for a time. Do not try to bottle the rainbow. Do not try to nail it to the wall. Just let it have been what it was, and let yourself have been the lucky person who stood in exactly the right place to see it. You know, the Buddha had a way of using nature as his greatest teaching tool. He did not need textbooks or blackboards or elaborate philosophical systems. He pointed to the trees and said, "Look, they shed their leaves without anguish." He pointed to the river and said, "Look, it flows around every obstacle without resentment." He pointed to the sky and said, "Look, it holds every cloud, every storm, every sunrise without choosing favorites." And in these simple observations, he communicated truths so deep that scholars are still unpacking them 25 centuries later. One of the most striking nature teachings comes from the Vammika Sutta, the discourse on the ant hill, where the Buddha describes a series of symbolic images in a dream. Among them is the image of digging into an ant hill and finding, layer by layer, various objects: a bolt, a toad, a fork in the path, a strainer, a tortoise, a butcher's knife, and finally, a piece of meat. Each object represents a different obstacle on the path to liberation. The bolt is the bar of ignorance. The toad is anger. The fork is doubt. The strainer is the 5 hindrances. The tortoise is the 5 aggregates. The butcher's knife is sensual pleasure. And the piece of meat is craving and delight. What is interesting about this teaching is the image of digging, of going deeper, layer by layer, through the obstacles until you reach the core. Letting go of someone is like this. It is not a single act but a process of excavation. You dig through the first layer, which is the acute pain of separation, and you think you have reached the bottom. But then you find another layer beneath it, the layer of self-doubt, the "was I enough" and the "could I have done more?" And beneath that, another layer, the layer of anger, the "how could they" and the "they had no right." And beneath that, another layer, the layer of fear, the "I will never find this again" and the "I am destined to be alone." And you keep digging, and you keep finding layers, and it can feel endless, and you can wonder whether there is a bottom at all. But there is. The Buddha promises that there is. At the very bottom, beneath all the pain and doubt and anger and fear, there is something clean, something clear, something that has been untouched by all the drama playing out on the surface. It is your own awareness, your own presence, your own fundamental okayness. It was there before the relationship, it was there during the relationship, and it is here now, after the relationship, patient and still and waiting for you to stop digging long enough to notice it. There is a teaching from the Mahayana tradition, attributed to the great master Shantideva, that speaks directly to this process. In his Bodhikariyavatara, Shantideva writes, "Where would I possibly find enough leather to cover the surface of the earth? But wearing leather sandals is equivalent to covering the earth with leather." In other words, you cannot change the world to eliminate your suffering. You cannot control other people, cannot prevent loss, cannot guarantee that those you love will stay. But you can change the way your mind relates to these realities. You can put on the sandals of wisdom and walk across any terrain without being cut. This is not a call to deny your feelings. Shantideva was not a Stoic. He was, by all accounts, one of the most emotional and passionate writers in the entire Buddhist tradition. His writings pulse with feeling, with fervent devotion, with a love for all beings so vast that it brings tears to the eyes of readers even today. But he understood that feelings, however intense, are not facts. They are weather. They pass through the sky of your mind, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, but they always pass. The sky remains. Let me circle back to something practical, something you can actually use in the minutes and hours and days when the missing becomes unbearable. The Buddha taught a practice that is extraordinarily simple and extraordinarily effective, and it is called noting. In the context of vipassana meditation, noting is the practice of mentally labeling whatever is arising in your experience. Not analyzing it, not judging it, not trying to change it, just naming it quietly and moving on. So when the wave of longing hits you, instead of being swept away by it, you pause, and you note, longing. That is all. Just the word. And then you observe what happens. Usually, the longing does not immediately disappear, but something subtle shifts. By naming it, you have created a tiny gap between you and the feeling. You are no longer inside the longing, drowning in it. You are watching the longing from a slight distance, the way you might watch a cloud from a hilltop. The cloud is still there. The sky is still gray. But you are on the hilltop, not inside the cloud, and that makes all the difference. When the self-blame arises, you note, blaming. When the fantasy of reunion plays its seductive movie in your mind, you note, fantasizing. When the anger flares, you note, anger. When the sadness settles over you like a heavy blanket, you note, sadness. Each time you note, you are exercising your capacity for awareness. Each time you note, you are strengthening the muscle of mindfulness. And each time you note, you are gently reminding yourself, I am not this feeling. I am the one who is aware of this feeling. And the one who is aware is always, always, free. This practice may sound too simple to be effective, and I understand that skepticism. When your heart is shattered, you want something dramatic, something powerful, something that matches the scale of your pain. A little mental label seems laughably inadequate in the face of the storm raging inside you. But the Buddha compared mindfulness to a small rudder on a large ship. The rudder is tiny compared to the ship, tiny compared to the ocean, tiny compared to the storm. But it is the rudder that determines whether the ship reaches the shore or is dashed against the rocks. Mindfulness is your rudder. It will not stop the storm. But it will keep you pointed toward safe harbor. There is another practice that the Buddha taught which is particularly relevant to the process of letting go, and that is the contemplation of impermanence. Now, I know that impermanence can sound like a cold, abstract, philosophical concept, the kind of thing a professor might lecture about in a dusty classroom while students fight to stay awake. But the Buddha did not teach impermanence as an abstract concept. He taught it as a living, breathing, moment-to-moment reality that, when truly seen, has the power to liberate. In the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the Buddha instructs practitioners to contemplate the arising and passing away of all phenomena, the body, feelings, mind states, and mental objects. He says, one abides contemplating the nature of arising, the nature of passing away, the nature of both arising and passing away. And in this contemplation, something remarkable happens. You begin to see that nothing, absolutely nothing, stays the same for even a single moment. Your body is changing. Your breath is changing. Your thoughts are changing. Your feelings are changing. The light in the room is changing. The temperature of the air is changing. Everything is in motion, everything is in flux, everything is in a constant state of becoming and unbecoming. And in this ceaseless flow of change, where is the permanence that your attachment depends on? Where is the fixed, stable, unchanging person that you are clinging to? They do not exist. Not because they are not real, but because they, like you, like everything, are a process, not a thing. They are a river, not a stone. And you cannot hold a river. You can swim in it, you can drink from it, you can sit on its banks and watch it shimmer in the sunlight, but you cannot hold it in your hands. The moment you try, it slips through your fingers, and all you are left with is wet palms and a sense of bewildered loss. This is not a tragedy. This is the nature of reality. And when you stop fighting reality and start flowing with it, something extraordinary happens, the suffering lessens. Not because the pain disappears, but because you are no longer adding the pain of resistance to the pain of loss. You are no longer exhausting yourself in a battle you cannot win, the battle to make permanent what is inherently impermanent. You are simply allowing what is to be what it is, and in that allowing, you find a peace that is not dependent on anything staying the same. The great Ajahn Chah, one of the most beloved forest monks of the Thai tradition, used to hold up a glass and say, "Do you see this glass? I love this glass. It holds my water admirably and it glistens in the sunlight. But for me, this glass is already broken. Because I know that one day the wind will knock it off the shelf, or my hand will bump it and send it crashing to the floor. And when that happens, I will say, of course. Because I understood its breaking long before it broke." He was not being nihilistic. He was not saying the glass does not matter. He was saying that by accepting the glass's fragility from the very beginning, he was free to enjoy it completely, without the anxiety of trying to protect it from a fate that is already sealed. Can you see your relationship that way? Can you look back and say, "It was a beautiful glass. It held the water of my days and shone in the light, and now it is broken, and of course it is broken, because that is what glasses do." Not with bitterness, but with the gentle, wistful, almost amused acceptance of someone who understands how the universe works. That acceptance does not come overnight. It might not even come in a year. But it comes. The Buddha guaranteed it. Impermanence, the very thing that causes your suffering right now, is also the thing that will end it. Because if everything changes, then this pain, too, will change. This heartbreak, too, will pass. This seemingly endless night, too, will give way to dawn. You cannot stop the turning of the wheel, and thank goodness for that, because the same turning that took them away from you will also carry you towards something new, something you cannot yet imagine, something that is being assembled in the invisible workshop of causality even as you sit here reading these words. There is a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, often called the parable of the mountain, where the Buddha describes two great mountains, one from the east and one from the west, slowly, inexorably rolling toward each other, crushing everything in their path. He asks his monks, if those two great mountains were rolling toward you, grinding everything to dust, and there was no escape, no refuge, no hiding place, what would you do? The monks are silent, and the Buddha says, given the rarity of human birth, given the preciousness of this life, given the inescapable reality of death, what is there to be done but to live well, to practice well, to love well, to awaken? The mountains are coming. For all of us. Not just the mountain of death, but the mountain of loss, the mountain of change, the mountain of everything we hold dear eventually slipping through our fingers. And in the face of those advancing mountains, what is there to be done but to live fully, to love generously, to hold lightly, and to let go gracefully when the time comes? You are letting go right now. Even if it does not feel like it, even if it feels like you are clutching tighter than ever, the process is already underway. Time is doing its quiet, relentless work. The sharp edges of the pain are being worn smooth by the passage of days. The obsessive thoughts are losing their power, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a battery running down. The space that was once filled entirely by them is beginning to admit other things, small pleasures, minor distractions, faint stirrings of curiosity about what lies ahead. Do not dismiss these small things. Do not wave them away as insignificant compared to the grand drama of your heartbreak. They are the first green shoots pushing up through the scorched earth. They are the evidence that life is reasserting itself, that your capacity for engagement with the world was not destroyed, only temporarily dormant. Every small pleasure is a tiny rebellion against the tyranny of grief, a quiet declaration that says, I am still here, and the world still has something to offer me. There is a verse in the Therigatha, spoken by the nun Mutta, that captures this perfectly. She says, "Free, I am free. Free from the three crooked things, mortar, pestle, and my crooked husband. I am free from birth and death. Everything that led me to rebirth has been pulled out." The directness of her joy, the unapologetic celebration of her liberation, is infectious. She does not qualify her freedom. She does not say, "Well, I suppose I should be grateful, but I still miss him sometimes." She says, simply, freely, exuberantly, free. And there is nothing wrong with wanting that freedom for yourself, nothing selfish, nothing cold, nothing unloving about it. Freedom from attachment is not freedom from love. Let me say that again, because it is so easy to misunderstand and so important to get right. Freedom from attachment is not freedom from love. It is freedom from the suffering that comes when love is contaminated by need, by possessiveness, by the insistence that things be other than they are. When you let go of attachment, you do not lose the love. You purify it. You distill it down to its essence, which is warmth without conditions, care without demands, kindness without strings. And that purified love is not less than the attached love. It is more. Infinitely more. It is the love that the Buddha radiated to every being he encountered, the love that is described in the texts as immeasurable, because it literally has no measure, no boundary, no limit. You might wonder how to cultivate this kind of love, especially when you are in pain, especially when the very mention of love without attachment sounds like a nice ideal that has no relevance to the messy, aching reality of your actual life. And that is a fair question. The answer, like most answers in the Buddha's teaching, is both simple and difficult. You practice. You sit with yourself, in whatever state you are in, angry, sad, confused, numb, and you begin, however tentatively, however awkwardly, to send kindness to yourself. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. You do not have to believe it. You do not have to feel it. You just have to say it, over and over, like planting seeds in soil that feels barren, trusting that the seeds know what to do even when you do not. And then, when you are ready, and only when you are ready, you extend the kindness outward. To a friend. To a family member. To someone you barely know. And eventually, when the heart has softened enough, when the ground has been prepared, you extend it to them. To the person who left. To the person you are letting go of. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be free from suffering. Not because they deserve it, not because they earned it, not because you are a saint, but because sending them kindness is the final act of release. It is the moment when the closed fist opens completely and the moonlight floods back in. You do not have to do this today. You do not have to do this month or this year. There is no rush. The Buddha spent 45 years teaching, and even he did not expect people to transform overnight. He met people where they were. He honored their pace. He never rushed anyone's healing, never shamed anyone for their slowness, never suggested that there was a deadline for awakening. He simply offered the path and said, in effect, when you are ready, it is here. The path is here for you too. Not as a demand, not as a prescription, not as a set of rules you must follow or a standard you must meet. Just as an open door. You can walk through it whenever you choose. And if today is not the day, that is perfectly fine. Today, maybe all you can do is breathe. Maybe all you can do is get through the next hour, the next minute, the next heartbeat. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in fact, a kind of heroism that the world rarely recognizes but that the Buddha saw and honored in every struggling, stumbling, magnificently imperfect being he ever met. There is a moment in the Sutta Nipata where a man comes to the Buddha and says, I am overwhelmed. I do not know what to do. My mind is scattered, my heart is broken, and I cannot see the way forward. And the Buddha does not give him a 10-step plan. He does not prescribe a course of meditation. He says, simply, when you are overwhelmed, attend to what is right in front of you. Just this one thing. Just this one moment. Just this one breath. The path reveals itself one step at a time, and you only ever need to see the step you are on. That is the wisest advice anyone has ever given about navigating heartbreak. You do not need to see the whole path. You do not need to know how the story ends. You do not need a map of the terrain between here and healed. You just need to take the next step, and the step after that, and the step after that. And one day, without fanfare, without a dramatic moment of transformation, you will look around and realize that you have walked a very long way from where you started, and the view from here is different, wider, gentler, tinged with a quiet beauty that you could not have appreciated if you had not walked through the valley of loss to get here. The Buddha once said, in the Dhammapada, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. So let me offer you one word, not as a solution, not as a magic formula, but as a companion for the road, patience. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with the process. Be patient with the pain, which will transform itself in its own time, at its own pace, according to its own mysterious logic. You are not behind schedule. You are not failing at letting go. You are doing exactly what you need to do, which is feeling what you feel, one moment at a time, with as much kindness as you can muster. And on the days when you cannot muster any kindness at all, when the well runs dry and you feel nothing but exhaustion and numbness and the dull gray flatness of a heart that has cried itself empty, even those days are part of the path. Even those days are carrying you forward. Even those days are seeds germinating in the dark, invisible soil of your becoming. You cannot see the roots growing, but they are growing. You cannot feel the ground shifting, but it is shifting. And one day, one ordinary, unremarkable, Tuesday afternoon kind of day, something green will push through the surface, and you will realize that you have been growing all along, even when you thought you were dying. The Buddha saw this in every person he met. He saw the seed of awakening in the murderer Angulimala, who wore a garland of fingers around his neck but became one of the most peaceful monks in the Sangha. He saw the seed of awakening in the courtesan Mbapali, who offered him her mango grove and later renounced everything to follow the path. He saw the seed of awakening in the stubborn, proud, argumentative Sakaka, who came to debate the Buddha and left humbled and transformed. If the Buddha could see the seed of awakening in those people, in people who had killed, who had sold their bodies, who had built their lives on arrogance and conflict, then surely, there is a seed of awakening in you, in your gentle, battered, still beating heart, waiting for the right season to bloom. And maybe, just maybe, this heartbreak is the season. Maybe this is the cracking open that the seed has been waiting for. Because seeds do not bloom by staying intact. They bloom by breaking apart. The shell has to split for the green to emerge. The old form has to dissolve for the new form to take shape. And heartbreak, for all its devastation, is one of the most powerful forms of breaking open that a human being can experience. It shatters the shell of who you thought you were, the identity you constructed around being someone's partner, someone's beloved, someone's other half. And in the shattering, there is space, raw, terrifying, exhilarating space, for something entirely new to grow. You did not choose this breaking. Nobody would. But now that it has happened, you have a choice about what to do with the broken pieces. You can spend the rest of your life trying to glue them back together, trying to reconstruct the exact shape you had before, trying to return to a version of yourself that no longer exists. Or you can gather the pieces, look at them honestly, and begin to arrange them into a new shape, a shape that includes the cracks, that does not hide the damage, that is more beautiful precisely because it has been broken and reassembled with care. There is a practice in the Japanese aesthetic tradition called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. When a bowl or a cup shatters, instead of throwing it away or trying to make the repair invisible, the artisan fills the cracks with gold lacquer, so that the broken places become the most luminous, the most precious, the most striking part of the whole piece. The philosophy behind kintsugi is that breakage is not something to be disguised or ashamed of. It is part of the object's history, part of its beauty, part of what makes it unique and irreplaceable. Now, kintsugi is a Japanese art, not a Buddhist teaching in the strict doctrinal sense. But the spirit of it resonates deeply with the Buddha's understanding of suffering and transformation. The Buddha never said that suffering was meaningless. He never said it was something to be endured with grim stoicism. He said it was something to be understood, penetrated, seen through, and in the seeing through, transformed into wisdom. Your heartbreak is not meaningless suffering. It is raw material. It is the ore from which compassion is smelted, the fire in which wisdom is forged. You are in the forge right now, and it is hot, and it is painful, and every part of you wants to escape. But the metal that emerges from the forge is stronger, more flexible, more resilient than the metal that went in. Let me tell you about a monk named Kisa-Gautami, though perhaps not the version of her story you have heard before. Most people know the part about the mustard seed, the part where the Buddha sends her to find a household that has never known death. But there is a lesser-told continuation of her story that is equally important. After Kisa-Gautami realized that death is universal, after she laid her dead child to rest and came to the Buddha for ordination, she did not immediately find peace. She struggled. The texts tell us that for a long time after her ordination, she was restless, distracted, unable to settle into meditation. The grief had not magically vanished with her intellectual understanding of impermanence. She understood the teaching, but her heart had not yet absorbed it. There was a gap between her mind and her heart, and in that gap, the pain continued to live. One evening, she was sitting alone, watching the flame of an oil lamp. She watched it flicker, brighten, dim, flicker again. And she noticed that the flame was never the same for 2 consecutive moments. It was constantly changing, constantly renewing itself, constantly dying and being reborn in the very same instant. And something about that observation, something about the direct, non-conceptual seeing of impermanence in that tiny flame, broke through the gap between her mind and her heart. She did not just understand impermanence. She felt it. She lived it. And in that living, the grief released its grip, not because the grief was wrong, but because the grief had completed its work. It had broken her open enough for the light to get in. Kisa Gautami then spoke a verse that is recorded in the Therigatha: "The message of the flame has reached me. The deaths of all my children have taught me. I have pulled out the arrow. The burden is set down. I have done what needed to be done. I have done what needed to be done." There is such quiet triumph in those words. Not the triumph of someone who won a battle, but the triumph of someone who survived one. She did not conquer grief. She walked through it, and on the other side, she found herself still standing, still breathing, still alive, transformed but not destroyed. You will find yourself on the other side too. You will. Not because someone promises you so, but because that is how impermanence works. If everything changes, then your pain must also change. If nothing stays the same, then this darkness cannot stay the same either. The only constant in the universe is change itself, and that constant is, paradoxically, the most reliable source of hope you will ever find. But while you are in the middle of it, while the darkness feels thick and permanent and all-consuming, there is something else I want to talk to you about, something that is rarely discussed in the context of letting go, and that is the role of forgiveness. Not necessarily forgiving the other person, though that may come in time. But forgiving yourself. Because here is what happens when a relationship ends: the mind goes on a rampage of self-interrogation. It replays every argument, every misstep, every moment when you could have been kinder, more patient, more understanding, more present. It builds a case against you, a meticulous, comprehensive, utterly convincing case that proves beyond all reasonable doubt that you are the one who ruined everything. And the verdict, handed down by the merciless judge of your own inner critic, is always guilty. The Buddha understood the destructive power of self-blame. In the Vitakkasanthana Sutta, the discourse on the removal of distracting thoughts, he taught 5 methods for dealing with unwholesome thought patterns. The first is to replace the unwholesome thought with a wholesome one, like a carpenter knocking out a coarse peg with a fine one. The second is to examine the danger of the thought, seeing how it leads to suffering. The third is to simply ignore the thought, withdrawing attention from it the way you might look away from an unpleasant sight. The fourth is to relax the thought formation, gradually winding down the mental energy that fuels the thought. And the fifth, if all else fails, is to crush the thought with the mind, teeth clenched, tongue pressed to the roof of the mouth, like a strong man holding down a weaker man. Now, the fifth method sounds violent, and it is the method of last resort. But even the fifth method is not violence against yourself. It is violence against the thought pattern, against the habitual loop of self-blame that keeps you chained to a past you cannot change. The Buddha was not a passive observer of mental suffering. He was an active, strategic, sometimes fierce intervener. He believed that the mind could be trained, that harmful patterns could be interrupted, that the tyranny of self-destructive thinking could be overthrown. And he offered these 5 methods as tools, practical, usable, time-tested tools, for anyone who is caught in the grip of thoughts that torment rather than liberate. When the self-blame arises, when the inner prosecutor begins presenting its case, you have a choice. You can sit in the courtroom and listen to every piece of evidence and accept the guilty verdict and sentence yourself to a lifetime of regret. Or you can stand up, politely but firmly, and say, "This court has no jurisdiction here. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. I was imperfect, yes, but imperfection is not a crime. It is the human condition." The Buddha himself acknowledged imperfection as the starting point of the spiritual journey, not its disqualification. He did not seek out perfect people to teach. He sought out suffering people, confused people, broken people, angry people, frightened people, because those were the people who had the motivation to change. Perfection does not seek liberation. Only suffering seeks liberation. And your suffering right now, your heartbreak, your self-doubt, your inability to let go, these are not signs that you are a failure. They are signs that you are ready. Ready for what? Ready for the next phase of your growth, whatever that looks like, wherever it leads. And it might lead to places you never expected. It might lead you to a new passion, a new friendship, a new understanding of yourself that would not have been possible within the confines of the relationship you lost. The Buddha often spoke of dukkha, suffering, as a teacher, not an enemy. In the same way that a doctor uses pain to diagnose an illness, suffering, when met with awareness, can diagnose the places in your heart where clinging has taken root. And once the diagnosis is made, the treatment can begin. The treatment is not dramatic. It is not a pill you swallow or a prayer you recite or a mantra you chant until the pain stops. The treatment is simply this: attention. Patient, gentle, honest attention to what is actually happening inside you, moment by moment, breath by breath. Not what you wish were happening. Not what you think should be happening. But what is actually happening. The raw, unedited, unfiltered reality of your inner experience. When you give this kind of attention to your heartbreak, something surprising occurs. You begin to see that the heartbreak is not one monolithic feeling. It is a composite, a collage of many different feelings woven together so tightly that they appear to be one. There is sadness, yes, but there is also anger, and beneath the anger, there is fear, and beneath the fear, there is a longing that is so old and so deep that it seems to predate the relationship entirely. It is the longing to be seen, to be known, to be held, to be loved unconditionally. And that longing did not begin with this person. It began much earlier, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in a past life, perhaps in the very structure of consciousness itself, which the Buddha described as inherently restless, inherently seeking, inherently dissatisfied. This is the deepest layer of the ant hill. This is the meat at the bottom. This is the place where your attachment to this particular person connects to a much larger pattern, a pattern of seeking completion outside yourself, of looking for in another person what can only be found within. And when you see this pattern, when you really see it, not with judgment but with the calm, clear eyes of mindfulness, something loosens. Not just the attachment to this one person, but the entire pattern of seeking, the entire habit of placing your happiness in someone else's hands. This loosening is not a loss. It is a homecoming. It is the moment when you stop looking for yourself in someone else's eyes and start looking for yourself in your own heart. And what you find there, when you finally look, is not the emptiness you feared. It is fullness. A fullness that does not depend on anyone else's presence, a fullness that is simply the natural state of a heart that has stopped running and started resting. The Buddha described this resting in the Nibbana Sutta as the unconditioned, the state that is not born, not made, not created, and therefore cannot die, cannot be unmade, cannot be destroyed. It is the ground beneath the ground, the silence beneath the sound, the stillness beneath the movement. And it is not somewhere else. It is not in a monastery or a cave or a future lifetime. It is right here, right now, in this very moment, hidden in plain sight, waiting for you to stop looking elsewhere and simply arrive where you already are. I know that sounds paradoxical. I know that sounds like one of those Zen riddles that is supposed to confuse you into enlightenment. But it is actually much simpler than it sounds. You are already here. You have always been here. The person who left did not take you with them. You are still here, in this body, in this breath, in this moment. And this moment, stripped of all the stories you have been telling about it, stripped of all the fear and regret and projection, this moment is actually okay. It is manageable. It is livable. It might not be pleasant. It might not be what you would have chosen. But it is okay. And okay is enough to build on. Okay is enough to start from. Okay is the foundation upon which everything else can be constructed, one small, careful, patient brick at a time. There is a lovely passage in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha compares the development of the mind to the taming of a wild elephant. He says that a wild elephant, when first captured and brought to the trainer, is aggressive, frightened, resistant. It thrashes against its chains, trumpets in rage, refuses to cooperate. But a skilled trainer does not punish the elephant. A skilled trainer offers it food, speaks to it gently, touches it with care, and slowly, patiently, over weeks and months, the elephant calms. It learns to trust. It begins to respond to the trainer's voice. And eventually, the elephant that was once wild and dangerous becomes gentle, obedient, capable of extraordinary feats of strength and grace. Your heart right now is a wild elephant. It is thrashing, trumpeting, pulling against its chains. And you are the trainer. Not the punisher. The trainer. Your job is not to beat your heart into submission. Your job is not to force it to stop feeling what it feels. Your job is to approach it with kindness, with patience, with the steady, calm presence of someone who knows that this wildness is temporary, that beneath the thrashing there is a gentleness waiting to emerge, that the elephant will calm if you give it time and tenderness and trust. So give yourself time. Give yourself tenderness. Give yourself trust. Trust that you are capable of getting through this. Trust that the pain is not permanent. Trust that your heart, however wild it feels right now, knows how to heal itself if you will just stop getting in its way. Stop demanding that the healing happen faster. Stop comparing your timeline to someone else's. Stop measuring your recovery against some imagined standard of how quickly a person should bounce back from loss. There is no standard. There is no timeline. There is only your unique, individual, unrepeatable journey through this particular landscape of grief, and it will take exactly as long as it takes, and not one moment longer. The Buddha, in the Saddaka Sutta, used the image of a skilled acrobat balancing on a pole, and I mentioned this earlier, but there is another dimension to it that I want to explore. The apprentice acrobat said, "Let each of us watch over ourselves, and in doing so, we watch over each other." This is the paradox of healing. The best thing you can do for the person you love, even the person you are letting go of, is to take care of yourself. Because when you take care of yourself, you stop placing demands on them, stop needing them to be something they cannot be, stop asking them to fill a role in your life that was always yours to fill. And in that release, you free them too. You free them to be who they are, without the weight of your need pressing down on them. And that freedom, that clean, unconditional freedom, is the greatest gift you can give to anyone, including yourself. Maybe the person you are letting go of does not know that you are going through this. Maybe they have moved on, happily, obliviously, without a backward glance. And maybe that knowledge stings. Maybe it feels unfair that you are here, in this pain, while they are out there, apparently fine. But appearances are deceptive. You do not know what is happening inside them. You do not know what they feel when they lie in the dark at 3 in the morning. You do not know what memories surface when they hear a certain song or pass a certain place or smell a certain scent that takes them back to you. And even if they truly are fine, even if they have genuinely moved on without a trace of regret, that does not diminish your pain or your right to feel it. Their healing and your healing are separate processes, running on separate timelines, governed by separate causes and conditions. You do not need to synchronize your recovery with theirs. You only need to honor your own. The Buddha taught the concept of karma, often spelled karma, not as a system of cosmic reward and punishment but as the simple, natural law of cause and effect. Every action you take, every thought you think, every intention you hold, plants a seed that will bear fruit in its own time. The seeds of love you planted in that relationship, the kindness you showed, the care you gave, the vulnerability you offered, those seeds are not wasted. They do not disappear just because the relationship ended. They are part of your karma now, part of the vast, intricate tapestry of cause and effect that shapes your life. And they will bear fruit, in ways you cannot predict, in times you cannot foresee, in forms you cannot imagine. Maybe the fruit will be a deeper capacity for compassion that allows you to be a better friend, a better sibling, a better parent, a better stranger on the street. Maybe the fruit will be a wisdom that you carry into your next relationship, a wisdom that helps you love more skillfully, more openly, more honestly. Maybe the fruit will be a softening of the heart that allows you to forgive, not just this person, but yourself, and not just yourself, but everyone who has ever hurt you, and not just everyone who has ever hurt you, but every being who has ever caused harm out of their own confusion and pain. The Buddha saw this ripple effect of karma with perfect clarity. He saw that no act of love is ever isolated, ever contained, ever wasted. Every act of love sends ripples outward through the web of existence, touching beings you will never meet, influencing outcomes you will never see. The love you gave to this person did not end when the relationship ended. It is still moving, still rippling, still touching, still alive in the world. And that, if you can see it, is a kind of immortality. Not the immortality of the body or the relationship, which are always temporary, but the immortality of the heart's intention, which, once released into the world, can never be taken back. There is a line in the Karaniya Metta Sutta that reads, "Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another." When you are in the grip of heartbreak, it is tempting to wish harm upon the person who hurt you, to fantasize about their suffering, to take comfort in the imagined scenario of their eventual regret. And if those thoughts arise, let them arise. Do not judge yourself for having them. But also, gently, when you are ready, let them go. Because the anger you carry toward another person does not hurt them. It hurts you. It is the hot coal in your own hand, and you are the one being burned. Forgiveness, in the Buddhist sense, is not a gift you give to the other person. It is a gift you give to yourself. It is the act of setting down the hot coal, of opening your hand, of letting the burn begin to heal. And you do not have to forgive all at once. You can forgive in stages, in layers, peeling away the resentment a little at a time, the way you might peel an onion, layer by layer, with tears streaming down your face, until you reach the center, which is, surprisingly, empty. Not empty in a bad way. Empty in a free way. Empty in a spacious way. Empty the way the sky is empty, which is to say, full of infinite possibility. The Buddha reached that empty center, and he found there not nothing, but everything. He found a love without object, a joy without cause, a peace without condition. He found the end of seeking, the end of grasping, the end of the desperate, exhausting chase after something that was never outside himself to begin with. And from that empty center, he lived and taught and loved for 45 years, never lonely, never lost, never in need of anyone to complete him, because he had discovered that he was already complete, had always been complete, and that the incompleteness he had felt was nothing more than a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, a dream from which he had finally, gently, irreversibly awakened. You are in the process of waking up too, whether you know it or not. Every tear you shed is a layer of the dream dissolving. Every pang of longing that you meet with awareness instead of reactivity is another step toward clarity. Every moment you choose to stay present instead of fleeing into fantasy or numbing yourself into oblivion is a small but significant act of awakening. You are not sleeping through this. You are living through it, eyes open, heart open, even when every instinct screams at you to close down, to shut off, to build walls so high that nothing and no one can ever reach you again. The temptation to build walls is understandable. When you have been hurt, the logic of self-protection seems irrefutable. If I never let anyone in again, I can never be hurt again. If I keep my heart locked behind steel and stone, no one can break it. The math checks out, on the surface. But the Buddha saw through the surface. He saw that the walls you build to keep out pain also keep out joy. The armor you wear to protect your heart also prevents it from beating freely. The fortress of isolation that feels so safe is actually a prison, and you are both the prisoner and the warden, and you have thrown away the key. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha tells the story of a man who was terrified of snakes. He lived in a region where snakes were common, and every time he saw one, he was paralyzed with fear. So he decided to build a house with no openings, no windows, no doors, no gaps in the walls where a snake might enter. He sealed himself inside, perfectly safe, perfectly protected. And he sat there in the darkness, alone, unable to see the sky, unable to feel the breeze, unable to hear the birds or smell the flowers or touch the rain. He was safe from snakes. But he was also safe from life. The Buddha used this story to illustrate the futility of avoidance as a strategy for dealing with fear. You cannot protect yourself from suffering by withdrawing from experience. You can only protect yourself from suffering by changing your relationship to experience, by developing the wisdom to see things as they are and the equanimity to accept them as they come. The man did not need a house with no openings. He needed to understand snakes, to learn which ones were dangerous and which were harmless, to know how to move through snake country with awareness and caution and confidence. And you do not need a heart with no openings. You need a heart that knows how to love with awareness, how to give without losing itself, how to open without being destroyed. That kind of heart is not built overnight. It is built through the slow, patient accumulation of moments of courage, tiny moments that no one else might notice but that you know, deep down, required everything you had. The moment when you delete the text you were about to send. The moment when you choose not to check their social media. The moment when you say yes to an invitation you would rather decline because getting out of the house feels impossible. The moment when you sit with the loneliness instead of reaching for your phone. The moment when you cry, really cry, ugly cry, with no audience and no performance, just the raw, unfiltered release of a heart that has been holding too much for too long. Each of these moments is a brick in the foundation of your new heart, the heart that will carry you forward from here. And the foundation does not have to be finished for you to begin living again. You can start living on a partial foundation. You can start living right now, today, this moment, even if your heart is still under construction, even if the walls are half built and the roof is not on yet and the wind blows through freely. A heart under construction is not a broken heart. It is a heart in progress. It is a heart that has not given up. It is a heart that is still building, still reaching, still daring to believe that the finished structure will be worth all the labor. There is a story from the early Buddhist commentaries about a potter named Gaudakara, who was a devout layperson in the time of the Buddha Kassapa, one of the Buddhas who came before Gautama. Gaudakara was a simple man, poor, humble, living alone with his blind parents. He made pots for a living, and he gave away most of what he earned. He had nothing of material value. But the texts say that his heart was so full, so warm, so boundlessly generous, that even the devas, the celestial beings, would descend from the heavens to listen to him speak about the Dhamma. One day, a terrible storm destroyed Gaudakara's house. The roof was torn off, the walls collapsed, and he was left with nothing but the open sky above him. And Gaudakara, instead of despairing, instead of raging at his misfortune, looked up at the sky and smiled. "Well," he said, "now I have a much better roof." The rain fell on him, and he did not mind. The sun beat down on him, and he did not mind. He had lost his shelter, but he had not lost his peace, because his peace was not located in his house. It was located in his heart, and his heart, unlike his house, could not be destroyed by any storm. When you lose the shelter of a relationship, when the roof of partnership is torn away and you are suddenly exposed to the elements, it can feel devastating. The vulnerability is real. The disorientation is real. The cold is real. But you are still here, still standing, still alive, and the sky above you, however vast and terrifying, is also beautiful. It is also full of stars. It is also the same sky that has held every sunrise you have ever seen and will hold every sunrise you have yet to see. You have lost a roof, yes. But you have gained a sky. And a sky is infinitely larger than any roof. I want to talk for a moment about something that often happens in the later stages of letting go, something that can be confusing and even frightening if you are not prepared for it. It is the moment when you realize that you are not the same person you were when the relationship began. Not just different in the obvious ways, sadder, wiser, more cautious, but different in a fundamental, structural way that goes beyond the surface. The you who entered that relationship had certain beliefs, certain assumptions, certain ideas about love and partnership and what it meant to be happy. And those beliefs have been tested by the fire of your experience, and some of them survived, and some of them did not. The ones that did not survive are not losses to be mourned. They are illusions to be released. Maybe you believe that love conquers all. Maybe you believe that if you just loved hard enough, the other person would change, or the problems would dissolve, or the relationship would become what you needed it to be. Maybe you believe that being in a relationship was proof of your worth and being out of one was proof of your failure. These beliefs felt true because you held them for so long and because the culture around you constantly reinforced them. But they were never true. They were stories, narratives, constructs, and the relationship you lost has shown you, painfully but clearly, their limitations. The Buddha called this process right view, samadhi, the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view is not about seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. It is about seeing the world as it actually is, without the distortions of wishful thinking, without the filters of unexamined assumption, without the comforting fictions that we wrap around reality to make it more palatable. Right view is often uncomfortable. It strips away the stories we have been telling ourselves, sometimes for decades, and leaves us face to face with a reality that is simpler, starker, and ultimately more beautiful than anything we imagined. The reality is this: you are a temporary being in a temporary world, surrounded by temporary beings, all of you flowing through an endless river of change, and the only sane response to this reality is to love as deeply as you can, hold as lightly as you can, and let go as gracefully as you can when the time comes. That is it. That is the whole teaching, distilled down to a single breath. Love deeply. Hold lightly. Let go gracefully. The gracefully part is the hardest, I know. Grace in the midst of heartbreak feels like an impossible standard, like asking a drowning person to maintain good posture. But grace does not mean elegance. It does not mean composure. It does not mean smiling through the tears or pretending that everything is fine. Grace, in the Buddhist sense, means doing what needs to be done with as much awareness and as little extra suffering as possible. Grace means crying when you need to cry and stopping when you are done. Grace means being honest about your pain without being defined by it. Grace means stumbling and getting up and stumbling again and getting up again and never, ever concluding that the stumbling means you are on the wrong path. You are on the right path. The very fact that you are grappling with this, that you are thinking about it, feeling it, trying to understand it, is proof that you are on the right path. The wrong path would be numbness. The wrong path would be avoidance. The wrong path would be the sealed house with no windows, no doors, no light. You are not on that path. You are on the path of the open heart, the path that goes through the pain, not around it, and emerges on the other side transformed. There is a teaching in the Majjhima Nikaya about a group of monks who were practicing in the forest. They came to the Buddha and said, "Lord, we are beset by fear and dread. The forest is dark, the sounds are frightening, and we cannot concentrate." The Buddha did not tell them to leave the forest. He did not tell them to find a more comfortable place to practice. He said, "When fear and dread arise, do not change your posture. If you are walking, keep walking. If you are standing, keep standing. If you are sitting, keep sitting. Do not let the fear alter the course of your action. Simply continue, with awareness, doing what you were doing." This is perhaps the most practical advice there is for getting through heartbreak. When the fear arises, when the loneliness hits, when the dread of the future descends like a fog, do not change your posture. Keep going. Keep doing what you were doing. Get up in the morning. Brush your teeth. Make your bed. Eat your breakfast. Go to work or school or wherever your day takes you. Do the small, ordinary, mundane things that constitute a life. Not because they are exciting or inspiring or meaningful in any grand sense, but because they are the thread that keeps you sewn into the fabric of the world. They are the evidence that life continues, that you continue, that the story is not over. And here is what you will discover, gradually, almost imperceptibly, the doing of ordinary things becomes its own form of healing. There is a meditation in the mundane. There is a mantra in the making of breakfast. There is a prayer in the folding of laundry. Not because these activities are spiritual in any elevated sense, but because they ground you in the present, they anchor you in your body, they remind you that you are a living being with a life to live, and that life, however diminished it may feel right now, is still worthy of your attention, your care, your participation. The Buddha spent much of his time teaching lay people, ordinary people with ordinary lives, and his advice to them was always grounded in the practical, the daily, the here and now. He did not tell them to retreat to caves. He did not tell them to abandon their families. He told them to live their lives with awareness, with integrity, with kindness, and to notice the moments of peace that already existed within their days, like jewels hidden in a field, waiting to be found by anyone willing to look. Those moments of peace exist within your days too. They are small, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. The moment when you take a sip of water and it is exactly the right temperature. The moment when you step outside and the air smells like rain. The moment when a child laughs somewhere nearby and the sound bypasses your grief entirely and makes you smile before you can stop yourself. These are not distractions from your healing. They are your healing. They are the universe tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, I am still here. I am still beautiful. And you are still part of me." There is a teaching attributed to the great Zen master Dogen, who said, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by the 10,000 things." When you are consumed by heartbreak, you are the opposite of forgotten. You are hyper-present to yourself, hyper-aware of your own suffering, trapped in the echo chamber of your own pain. And that self-absorption, though entirely understandable, is itself a form of imprisonment. The more you focus on your pain, the larger it looms. The more you identify with your suffering, the more it defines you. The more you stare at the wound, the slower it heals. But when you begin to notice the 10,000 things, when you begin to let the world back in, one small detail at a time, the self that has been so heavy and so central begins to lighten, to dissolve at the edges, to become permeable again. You stop being a solid wall of grief and start being a window through which life can pass. And in that passing, in the flow of 10,000 moments through the open window of your awareness, you find that the self you were so desperately trying to protect, the self that felt so wounded and so fragile, was never really as solid as you thought. It was always in flux, always changing, always more fluid and more resilient than you gave it credit for. Let me share one more story with you, a story that comes from the Avadana Shataka, the collection of 100 Avadanas from the Sanskrit tradition. There was a king who possessed a magnificent jewel, the finest in all the land. He treasured it above all else and kept it locked in a golden box in the innermost chamber of his palace. He hired guards to watch it day and night. He installed locks upon locks, doors upon doors. He slept poorly, always afraid that someone might steal his treasure. His life became a prison of anxiety, all in service of protecting this one precious stone. One day, a wandering monk came to the palace and asked to see the king. The king, curious, granted an audience. The monk looked at the king's tired face, his worried eyes, his hunched shoulders, and said, "You look like a man carrying a great weight, your majesty." The king sighed and said, "I possess the most valuable jewel in the world, and I live in constant fear of losing it." The monk smiled gently and said, "The jewel you carry in your chest, your own open heart, is infinitely more valuable than the stone you keep in that box. And unlike the stone, it cannot be stolen. It can only be given away, freely, and in the giving, it multiplies. You are guarding the wrong treasure, my king." The king sat with those words for many days. And then, quietly, without announcement, he took the jewel from its golden box and gave it to a traveling merchant, asking only that the merchant pass it along to whoever needed it most. And the king, for the first time in years, slept through the night. Not because his circumstances had changed, but because his relationship to his treasure had changed. He had stopped clinging, and in the cessation of clinging, he found rest. You are guarding the wrong treasure. The relationship you are holding on to, the person you are afraid to release, the love you are desperately trying to preserve, these are not your greatest treasure. Your greatest treasure is your own heart, your own capacity for awareness, your own ability to love and be loved, which exists independently of any particular person, any particular relationship, any particular outcome. When you release the lesser treasure, the conditioned, temporary, inherently unstable treasure of romantic attachment, you make room for the greater treasure, the unconditioned, permanent, inherently stable treasure of your own awakened heart. And I want to be clear, I am not calling your love lesser in the sense of unimportant or unworthy. It was important. It was worthy. It was real and valuable and meaningful. But it was conditioned, meaning it depended on certain circumstances to exist. And when those circumstances changed, the love, in that particular form, could not continue. That is not a defect in the love. That is simply the nature of conditioned things. They arise when conditions are present, and they cease when conditions are absent. Your own heart, however, is not conditioned in the same way. It does not depend on someone else's presence to beat. It does not depend on someone else's love to feel. It does not depend on someone else's staying to exist. It is yours, unconditionally, permanently, indestructibly yours. The Pali word for this kind of unconditional freedom is vimutti, liberation. And the Buddha described it in the most beautiful, most tender, most joyful terms. He said it was like being released from prison. He said it was like being cured of a long illness. He said it was like emerging from a dense forest into an open clearing. He said it was like crossing a vast desert and finding an oasis. He said it was like being a poor man who suddenly discovers a pot of gold buried in his own backyard. Each of these metaphors points to the same truth: liberation is not something foreign, something distant, something you have to travel far to find. It is something that has been here all along, buried under the layers of clinging and craving and confusion, waiting for you to dig it up. You are digging right now. Every moment of awareness, every breath of mindfulness, every tear of honest grief, every act of self-compassion, is a shovel stroke in the earth of your own liberation. And the gold is there. I promise you, the gold is there. Not because someone told me so, not because I read it in a book, but because the Buddha found it, and Pattakara found it, and Kisa Gautami found it, and Rupananda found it, and Vakali found it, and countless other broken, struggling, magnificently imperfect human beings have found it across 25 centuries of digging. And if they found it, you can find it too. Because you are made of the same stuff they were made of. You have the same heart, the same mind, the same capacity for awakening. The only difference between you and the Buddha is that the Buddha finished digging. You are still in process. And being in process is not a failure. It is the most honest, the most courageous, the most deeply human place to be. And so here you are, in the middle of the dig, covered in dirt, tired, uncertain, wondering if the gold is real or just a story someone told you to keep you going. That doubt is natural. The Buddha himself experienced doubt, in the weeks before his enlightenment, when Mara, the great tempter, came to him and whispered, "Who are you to seek liberation? Who are you to think you can be free? You are nobody. You are nothing. Give up. Go home." And the Buddha, instead of arguing with Mara, instead of trying to prove his worth with words, simply reached down and touched the earth. He placed his fingertips on the ground and said, "The earth is my witness." That was all. No grand speech. No dramatic confrontation. Just the simple, quiet, unshakable act of grounding himself in what was real, what was solid, what was here. When the doubt comes for you, and it will come, when the voice in your head says, "You will never get over this, you will never love again, you will never be whole," you do not need to argue with it. You do not need to prove it wrong. You just need to touch the earth. Ground yourself in what is real. Feel the floor beneath your feet, the air in your lungs, the warmth of your own hand against your own skin. These are not metaphors. They are physical realities, sensory anchors that can pull you out of the spinning vortex of thought and back into the solid, stable, endlessly reliable present moment. The present moment has never let you down. It has always been here, waiting, patient, ready to receive you whenever you are ready to return to it. And in the present moment, the person you are missing does not exist. That sounds harsh, but let me explain. The person you are missing is not the person who is out there somewhere living their life right now. The person you are missing is a memory, a mental construction, a highlight reel edited by nostalgia and projected onto the screen of your mind by the filmmaker of your longing. The real person, the actual person, is a complex, flawed, ever-changing being who may or may not resemble the version you carry in your heart. And the gap between the person you are missing and the person they actually are is the space in which most of your suffering lives. The Buddha saw this with devastating clarity. He taught that we never really know another person. We know our perception of them, our interpretation of them, our projection onto them. We create a mental image and then fall in love with the image, and when the image and the reality diverge, as they inevitably must, we feel betrayed, as if the person failed us, when in fact it was our image that failed us, because images always fail, because images are static and people are not. In the Honeyball Sutta, the Madhyapindika Sutta, the Buddha lays out a detailed chain of perception that shows how contact between a sense organ and a sense object gives rise to feeling, which gives rise to perception, which gives rise to thought, which gives rise to proliferation, which is the mind's tendency to spin out elaborate narratives from a single point of contact. You see a face, and from that single visual contact, the mind proliferates an entire universe of meaning. This person is beautiful, this person is desirable, this person could make me happy, this person is my future, this person is my everything. And all of that, all of those layers of meaning, are added by the mind. They are not inherent in the face. They are projections, elaborations, stories spun from the raw material of sensory contact. When you understand this, not intellectually but experientially, something profound shifts in your relationship to longing. You begin to see that what you are longing for is not a person but a feeling, not a reality but a story, not a presence but a projection. And projections, unlike people, can be gently, compassionately, firmly turned off. Not by suppressing them, not by pretending they do not exist, but by seeing them for what they are, which is mental constructions, and choosing, with full awareness, not to feed them. Every time you replay the highlight reel, you are feeding the projection. Every time you read old messages, you are feeding the projection. Every time you imagine a reunion, a reconciliation, a future that includes them, you are feeding the projection. And the projection, well fed, grows stronger, more vivid, more convincing, until it feels more real than reality itself. But it is not real. It is a hologram. It is a dream within a dream. And you have the power, in any moment, to stop feeding it and let it fade. Not to destroy it, not to attack it, but simply to withdraw your attention from it, the way you might stop watering a plant that you no longer want to grow. Without water, the plant does not die violently. It simply, quietly, over time, returns to the earth from which it came. This is the deepest practice of letting go, not the letting go of a person, but the letting go of a story. The person was real. The love was real. The experiences you shared were real. But the version of them that lives in your mind, the version that you cling to, the version that you replay and romanticize and mourn, that version is a story. And stories, however beautiful, however compelling, however deeply felt, are not the same as reality. Reality is what is here now. Reality is this breath, this moment, this heartbeat. And reality, when you finally turn to face it, is not the enemy you feared. It is the ground you have been looking for all along. I think of the Buddha in his final moments, lying on his right side, his head resting on his hand, surrounded by monks and lay people and even the trees themselves, which are said to have bloomed out of season in tribute to him. He was dying. He knew he was dying. And he was at peace. Not because he had no one to miss, not because he had no attachments to sever, but because he had spent 45 years practicing exactly this, the art of being fully present to what is, without needing it to be anything other than what it is. His last words, recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, were these: all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your own salvation with diligence. All conditioned things are impermanent. Every relationship, every feeling, every body, every breath, every moment. Impermanent. And within that impermanence, within that constant, relentless, unstoppable flow of change, there is not despair. There is freedom. Because if everything changes, then nothing is fixed, and if nothing is fixed, then nothing is truly lost, and if nothing is truly lost, then the grief you carry, however real it feels, is based on an illusion, the illusion that something permanent has been taken from you. But nothing permanent was ever yours to begin with. And paradoxically, this is not a reason for sorrow. It is a reason for celebration. Because it means that you are free. Free to love without clinging. Free to cherish without possessing. Free to connect deeply and release gracefully. Free to be fully, ecstatically, heartbreakingly alive. And you know what? Being alive is messy. It is complicated. It is painful and joyful and confusing and boring and thrilling and mundane, sometimes all in the same afternoon. The Buddha never promised that the path would be clean or linear or comfortable. He promised that it would be worth it. He promised that the peace on the other side of understanding was real, was accessible, was available to every being who had the courage to look at their own life honestly and say, I am ready to stop running. I am ready to stop grasping. I am ready to let go of what I cannot keep and embrace what I cannot lose. What you cannot lose is your own awareness. What you cannot lose is your own capacity for kindness. What you cannot lose is the vast, luminous, indestructible space of your own heart, which has held every experience you have ever had and will hold every experience you have yet to have, without ever being damaged, without ever being diminished, without ever being anything less than whole. So tonight, if the missing is strong, if the ache is sharp, if the loneliness feels like a physical weight pressing down on your chest, try this: instead of reaching for the phone, instead of reaching for the old photographs, instead of reaching outward at all, reach inward. Place your hand on your heart. Feel it beating. That beat is not for them. That beat is for you. It has been beating for you since before you met them, and it will continue beating for you long after the pain of their absence has softened into a gentle, bittersweet hum in the background of a life that is richer than you know. Feel the beat. Feel it pulse against your palm. That is the sound of your own aliveness, your own resilience, your own stubborn, magnificent refusal to be anything less than fully present in this world. That beat is the drumbeat of your own liberation, steady and strong and unwavering, even when everything else is in flux, even when the storm is raging, even when you cannot see the shore. The shore is there. The Buddha saw it. Pattakara saw it. Kisa Gautami saw it. The king who gave away his jewel saw it. The wild elephant that was gently tamed saw it. The snake that shed its skin saw it. The fruit that ripened and fell saw it. The flower that bloomed and faded saw it. And you will see it too. Not because you are special, not because you are chosen, not because you have done anything to deserve it, but because seeing the shore is the natural, inevitable consequence of being alive, of being aware, of being willing to keep your eyes open even when the view is painful. You are willing. I know you are willing, because you are still here. You are still listening. You are still reading. You have not closed the page, have not turned away, have not given up. And that willingness, that stubborn, quiet, unremarkable willingness to stay present in the face of suffering, is the most powerful force in the universe. More powerful than grief. More powerful than longing. More powerful than the seductive pull of a past that no longer exists and a future that has not yet been born. Your willingness to be here, right now, in this imperfect, painful, beautiful moment, is the engine of your own awakening. And so the river flows on, as rivers do, carrying everything with it, the leaves and the logs and the reflections of clouds and the memories of rain, carrying it all downstream, toward the sea, toward the vast, borderless, uncontainable sea that receives everything without judgment, that holds everything without grasping, that is both the destination and the source. You are the river. You are the sea. You are the leaf that the current carries and the shore that the wave caresses and the sky that holds it all. You are bigger than your heartbreak, wider than your loss, deeper than the deepest well of grief you have ever fallen into. You are the awareness in which the grief arises and the stillness in which it fades and the love that remains when everything else has moved on. The Buddha knew this about you. He knew it about every being he ever met. He looked at the drunk staggering in the street and saw a future Buddha. He looked at the thief skulking in the shadows and saw a future Buddha. He looked at the heartbroken woman weeping in the marketplace and saw a future Buddha. And if he were here right now, sitting beside you in the quiet of this evening, he would look at you, with your tired eyes and your aching heart and your beautiful, battered, still hoping soul, and he would see exactly the same thing. He would see someone who is already free, but has not yet noticed. He would see someone who is already whole, but has not yet looked. He would see someone who is already loved, beyond measure, beyond condition, beyond the comings and goings of any single human being, loved by the very fabric of existence itself, loved by the stars and the soil and the silence between heartbeats, loved not for what they do or who they are with or how well they perform the exhausting theater of having it all together, but simply, purely, unconditionally, for being alive. You are alive. And that is enough. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. Not enough in the sense of settling, not enough in the sense of giving up, but enough in the deepest, most radical, most liberating sense of the word. You, as you are, right now, in this moment, with all your cracks and all your gold, are enough. You are complete. You are whole. You are home. And the person you are letting go of, wherever they are, whatever they are doing, whoever they are becoming, they are on their own path, living their own story, learning their own lessons. Their path is not your responsibility. Their happiness is not your burden. Their journey is theirs, and yours is yours, and the place where those two journeys intersected for a time was beautiful, and it is over, and the beauty remains even though the intersection has passed. Let the beauty remain. Let it live in you, not as a wound but as a gift, not as a chain but as a wing. Let it lift you rather than drag you. Let it remind you, on the days when you forget, that you are capable of extraordinary love, that you have a heart big enough to hold another person inside it, that you have the courage to open yourself completely, even knowing, as the Buddha taught, that everything you open yourself to will eventually change. That courage is not common. That courage is not small. That courage is the same courage that the Buddha showed when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and said to Mara, to doubt, to fear, to every voice that told him he was not enough, "The earth is my witness. I am here. I am staying. And I will not be moved. You are here. You are staying. And you will not be moved. Not by grief, not by longing, not by the thousand small deaths of letting go, not by anything. Because you are rooted in something deeper than any relationship, deeper than any attachment, deeper than any story your mind can tell about who you need to be whole. You are rooted in the earth of your own being, the same earth the Buddha touched, the same earth that has held every being who has ever loved and lost and lived to love again. Touch the earth now. Feel it beneath you. Feel its steadiness, its patience, its ancient, enduring, unyielding support. It has held you through everything. It will hold you through this. And when the morning comes, as it always does, as it always will, you will rise, as you always do, as you always will, and you will step forward into a day that does not yet exist, a day that is pure potential, pure possibility, pure open space, waiting to be filled with whatever you choose to bring to it. Bring kindness. Bring awareness. Bring the hard-won wisdom of a heart that has been broken open and has discovered, to its eternal surprise, that open is exactly what it was meant to be all along.